Chapter 303. A few minutes later, Tony and Robert left the Central University in a taxi. However, when the taxi left the entrance of the dormitory area, a car parked by the side of the road started. The person in the car said into the walkie-talkie, "We've found him. He's coming out of the school. We're following him." However, Tony and Robert, who were in the car, were unaware of this. When the taxi stopped at a garden villa, Robert advised Tony, "This is your last chance. Once you enter, you'll be in big trouble. The 4 elementalists are in Kunbi's now. Before they discover you, you'd better stop immediately. Otherwise, I won't be able to protect you." Li Onping sneered. "For elementalists? They'd better pray that I find Anna here." Robert shook his head, unable to understand the other party's arrogance. Li Onping couldn't be bothered to explain further to Robert. If it wasn't because he wanted to save Anna and simply wanted to wipe out the other party, he could guarantee that no one in the entire building would be able to survive with a single palm strike. Li Onping grabbed Robert and got out of the car. The door opened, and 2 men in black walked out and asked, "Young Master Robert, why are you here?" When they arrived, Li Onping couldn't be bothered to waste any more time. He stretched out 2 psychic arms and pierced through the chests of the 2 men in black, one on the left and one on the right. "Wait here." When Tony heard this, he realized that the power that was restraining him had disappeared. Just as he was wondering if he should escape immediately, the feeling of being restrained returned to him. The speed was so fast that he wondered if it was an illusion. It only took a few seconds, but Li Onping had already walked through the entire villa, the garden, and the garage. With the speed of the psychic clone, no ability user could see it. Furthermore, the psychic clone wouldn't cause the air to move or make any sound. Therefore, Li Onping walked through all the places without attracting anyone's attention and even killed all the guards. It was only when Li Onping completed this series of actions that Robert shouted, "Why did you kill them?" However, Li Onping didn't answer him at all. He grabbed the man through Tony and walked towards Victor. Along the way, none of the attacks Robert had imagined came. They could only see corpses lying on the ground one after another. Screams of girls rang out incessantly. It was obvious that they had also discovered corpses in the distance. When Li Onping arrived at the hall, Victor and Poison I were running out of the room. Seeing Tony and Robert, Victor frowned. "Why are you here? Who's with you? Why did you casually bring him in?" Suddenly, he reacted. Looking at the corpses in the hall, he shouted, "Tom, Joey." No one answered him. Only Li Onping's voice came from Tony. "Where did you send Anna? Tell me, and I'll let your brother live." Victor sneered and ignored the other party's threat. "Poison Eye, kill him." Before he finished speaking, Poison Eye had already appeared behind Tony in a flash. A hint of surprise flashed through Li Onping's heart. When the other party had moved, it was as fast as teleportation, but it definitely wasn't teleportation. It seemed to be an ability to escape the rotation of the ground under his feet. Through the movement of the ground, he was able to move at high speed. This ability was a little special, but it was meaningless against Li Onping. Poison Eye slashed at Tony's neck with a karate chop. Seeing that the other party didn't react and didn't move at all, a hint of disdain flashed through Poison Eye's heart. He had originally thought that the other party was extraordinary after killing the guards in the hall. Now, it seemed that there was nothing impressive about him. However, this thought didn't last for half a second. When his karate chop landed on Tony's neck, a sharp pain came from his palm. The other party's neck didn't feel like a neck at all. He felt as if his palm had hit a piece of armor plate. But the next moment, an even more terrifying scene happened. When Poison Eye's palm came into contact with Tony's neck, his entire body was bound by a field of nothingness. Then, starting from his right palm, his entire arm began to twist in a spiral. "Ah!" Poison Eye screamed in pain, but he realized that he couldn't move at all. He could only watch helplessly as his arm started to twist in a spiral from his palm. Then, the twisting spread along his arm, his shoulder, and even his body. If no one came to stop it, Poison Eye could only watch helplessly as his body was minced inch by the field of nothingness. He was being twisted up like a rag. Victor's expression changed drastically. He took out his pistol and fired, but the bullet didn't react at all when it hit Tony's head. By the time he finished firing the pistol, Poison Eye's entire right arm had been twisted into a bloody mess. He had already fainted from the pain. Lianping said coldly, "Where is Anna now?" Victor immediately said, "I don't know. I've already given her to the four elements." Lianping didn't say anything, but Poison Eye woke up from the pain behind him once again. Amidst a shrill scream, his body was twisted from his shoulder. His entire body was lifted up by the field of nothingness. It was as if he would be wrung dry like a towel in the next moment. A ferocious expression appeared on Victor's face as he said word by word, "Friend, if you leave now, I'll treat it as if nothing happened. Otherwise, you'll become a mortal enemy of both the Square family and the four elements. Consider it carefully." When Victor saw the fear and nervousness on Tony's face, he almost thought that he had succeeded. But in the next second, reality slapped him hard in the face. Poison Eye's entire body was twisted into a spiral of rotten flesh, accompanied by a series of terrifying poochie-poochie sounds. Robert screamed as he looked at Tony in horror. He said in disbelief, "What on earth did you do?" When he saw his brother, who had accompanied him for so many years, die just like that, Victor's eyes were filled with endless hatred. However, he didn't refuse and said directly, "She's been sent to William. William is currently staying at the Palace Hotel." Palace Hotel? Lianping hadn't expected that William would be staying at the hotel he had been staying at previously. Then he saw Tony grab the terrified Robert. Victor's voice rang out once again, "You better not be lying to me. Otherwise, I'll kill your younger brother first before killing you." Just then, a group of fully armed men charged in, pointing their guns at the three people in the hall. A white man wearing a beret looked at Tony and said with a smile, "Young Master Tony, we're from the Lannister family's hunting team. Please come with us." Chapter 304. When the beret man heard Lianping's words, his heartbeat suddenly quickened. Lianping looked at the beret man's terrified expression and let out a cold snort. He could not be bothered to let the beret man drive him over. Initially, he had not wanted to draw attention to Anna, but it seemed that he had no other choice now. Tony did not move at all. Without accumulating any strength, he soared into the sky. He paused in midair for a moment, and then flew in the direction of the Palace Hotel. Seeing that Tony had left, the beret man heaved a sigh of relief. He relaxed from his high tension. He felt that his entire body was soft, and he was unable to exert any strength. Only when he looked in the direction Tony had left, his gaze was still filled with reverence. It was reverence toward great power. Thinking of this, the beret man suddenly took out his phone and said to his superior, "Captain, there's a problem." As he reported, he turned to look at Robert, who was kneeling on the ground. Robert's eyes were lifeless as he looked at the corpses on the ground in a daze. There was no hint of emotion in his eyes. The beret man thought, "This guy, he's probably crippled." On the other side, Lianping used his virtual field to bring Tony along as he flew toward the hotel. The great power took effect on Tony's body, causing him to feel waves of pain in his bones and muscles. However, he did not dare to have any complaints. Lianping's earlier actions had not only frightened Robert and the others, they had also frightened Tony. Living humans have been crushed so easily. This was the first time in over 20 years that he had seen such a bloody scene. Right now, Lianping was on par with the devil in his heart. Fortunately, this place was not far from the hotel. When Tony felt that his body was about to fall apart, his speed finally slowed down. A small black shadow slowly landed on the roof of the hotel without attracting anyone's attention. Tony stood where he was and took the time to rest. He did not ask Lianping anything. It was because he could sense that the creature in his body was in an extremely bad mood. Lianping wasn't in a good mood. Although he was in a hurry, it had been more than 10 hours since Anna went missing, and he still hadn't found her. Amidst the silence, Lianping's psychic chi was released from under Tony's feet. In an overwhelming form, it pressed down toward the entire hotel. At the same time, the field of nothingness spread out from Tony's feet and covered the entire building. In the bathroom of the hotel, a cleaner put down the mop and turned to walk to the window. He pushed the window outwards with his hand, but found that the window did not budge. Why can't I open the window? In the lobby downstairs, a man lowered his head and hurriedly walked towards the door. However, when he walked past the door, it was as if he had bumped into a wall. He let out a cry of pain. He raised his head and touched the open door in front of him. He felt as if his hand had touched an invisible barrier. The person in charge of the hunting team, this time, put down the phone in his hand and frowned. Out of the 43 members sent to capture Tony, 42 of them had died. This was far beyond his expectations. Furthermore, Tony himself had displayed strength that far exceeded the level 1 ability described in the information. At this moment, a voice came from the walkie-talkie. "Boss, we found Viper and the others. They're at 1303. The person in charge's eyes narrowed. No matter what was going on with Tony, they had to get rid of Viper first to increase the power of the negotiations between the two families. Thinking of this, he ordered, "Do it." However, not long after he gave the order, all the members sent back a strange message. "Boss, we can't go through the front door. We can't go through the back door of the kitchen either. The door of the parking lot has been sealed by something." The news came one after another. Other than the members who were hiding in the hotel, the other members of the hunting team couldn't enter the hotel. At this moment, the adjutant patted him on the shoulder and pointed in the direction of the hotel. "Boss, look at the rooftop." He looked over and let out a cry of surprise. "What the hell is that?" A gust of black psychic energy was spreading from the rooftop like a flowing waterfall, covering the entire hotel floor by floor. Psychic energy? At the same time, many people in the hotel had noticed the abnormality. Especially at the entrance of the lobby on the first floor, there were dozens of people gathered. There were guests and staff. They tried to break through the seal of the nihility force field, but it was obviously impossible. Some people who felt that something was wrong had already taken out their phones to call the police. On the 15th floor of the hotel, a white man with black hair was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the bedroom with his upper body naked. On the bed behind him, there were two women in disheveled clothes who were still in a deep sleep. If anyone from the Federation were to appear here, they would probably cry out in surprise. This was because the two women on the bed were both well-known female celebrities in the Federation. Feeling the black psychic energy spreading from the top of his head, the blond man's calm eyes flashed with a faint trace of displeasure. He snapped his fingers. Alan, the old man who had talked to Victor, silently walked into the bedroom. He lowered his head deeply, revealing a respectful and abnormally obedient appearance. Compared to the arrogant appearance he had when facing Victor, it was as if he was a completely different person. "What an arrogant fellow," he said softly. "Young master, do you need me to get rid of him?" William shook his head. He smiled and nodded at the glass window in front of him. He slowly said, "Although it's very arrogant, it's indeed an interesting ability, isn't it?" Alan nodded and asked, "What do you mean?" William chuckled. "The sample that the teacher requested this time doesn't have an ability user, right?" "Yes." "Then use him instead." Following the change in the hotel, the Cunby's police immediately rushed over. More than a dozen police cars stopped at the entrance of the hotel. Yellow isolation tape pulled up all the nearby streets. However, no matter how they tried, they were unable to break through the nihility force field at the door. A police officer pointed to the sky and shouted, "Why is there a helicopter there?" His subordinate beside him said, "It's NNC's helicopter. They came to broadcast after receiving the news." "Damn it, the TV station's helicopter support is faster than us?" He cursed angrily and said, "Hurry up and let them leave." "I understand." On the other side, a female reporter in the helicopter was holding a microphone and explaining nonstop. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kanshung Direct Attack. We have received a tip-off that an emergency has occurred at the Palace Hotel in the city center. The entire hotel has been completely sealed off from the outside, and there is no way to enter or leave. The police are now trying to find a way to rescue the people in the hotel in front of the door." At this point, the cameraman pointed the camera at the police car in the crowd at the door. Then, the female reporter on the side suddenly let out a surprised voice and shouted, "Quickly take a picture of the roof. Ladies and gentlemen, we can see a suspicious man standing on the roof of the hotel. At this moment, 2 helicopters belonging to the police also flew over the hotel and began to sound the horn to let the reporters leave. However, the guys from the TV station obviously ignored them. Instead, they aimed the camera firmly at the hotel. At this moment, Li Onping's chi finally swept from the roof to the underground parking lot. However, no, from the top floor to the basement, there was no trace of Anna at all. Seeing the helicopters flying around, Li Onping felt irritated. He directly controlled Tony and used 2 fingers to dig out a stone from the cement floor. With a gentle wave of his right hand, the stone whizzed toward a police helicopter. With a boom, the tail of the helicopter was directly broken. It had no choice but to descend while emitting thick smoke. Seeing this situation, the other 2 helicopters also instantly distanced themselves from the roof, not daring to approach again. However, although he did not find Anna, when his chi swept across the 15th floor, Li Onping still found the so-called young Master William. It was exactly the same as what he saw on the TV station. Let's say hello first. He saw Tony raise his right hand and casually pick up a stone from the floor. Then, like throwing a baseball, he threw the stone in his hand toward the position under his feet. The sonic boom exploded in an instant. At this moment, the position where the stone was launched and the position where Alan was standing formed a diagonal straight line. Alan just nodded and said, "I understand, young master. Please wait for a moment." Before he finished speaking, the straight line drawn by the stone had already passed through the 6th floor and directly opened a big hole in his stomach. Then, the stone did not stop and passed through more than 10 layers of obstacles and directly hit the entrance of the hotel, leaving a small pit with a diameter of 1 meter. As for the stone itself, it had already turned into powder in the process. Chapter 305. The essence of the immortality potion was the impurities left behind after a dire beast devoured a human. After the dire beast devoured humans, they would retain their essence and concentrate it on Ash's main body. The excess or inferior parts will be treated as impurities and expelled out of the body. For Ash, they might be impurities, but for most humans, they were powerful treasures that could replenish their vitality, strengthen their physique, and save their lives. Now in New Dongyang, after Ash's consciousness had died, the number of dire beasts was still low, but they still existed. Thanks to Koichi Aoda's help, the Research Institute was able to capture a few dire beasts and feed them to their clones. It was not easy for them to save up a batch of immortality potion for research. In the process, more than a dozen researchers who were feeding the dire beasts were sacrificed. After all, the dire beast's ability to ignore things was too strange. However, it was very time-consuming for dire beasts to produce immortality potion. Often, it would take them a year to produce a small bottle. In addition, with Ash's consciousness gone, the number of dire beasts was greatly reduced. This caused the Research Institute to give up on the idea of mass production through dire beasts. After a year, the vitality they could provide was very little. Originally, no one thought that mass production of immortality potion could be developed in a short time. However, when a researcher was studying Ash's cells, he accidentally found a connection between the two. Finally, using Ash's cells as raw materials, he recreated the so-called immortality potion through artificial synthesis. However, this was only the initial version, and its effect was far inferior to the original immortality potion. However, in terms of replenishing vitality, it had a very amazing effect, especially when he could mass produce it. This effect was very big. Whether it was the improvement of personal combat power, the extension of the lifespan of the people, or the improvement of medical treatment, it had a huge effect. Li Onping immediately sent another group of people to start digging up Ash's flesh and blood on a large scale to increase the production of immortality potion. In the next few days, as the day of the coronation approached, the whole of Tianjing looked peaceful on the surface, but underneath, it was turbulent. Representatives from various countries came to Tianjing one by one. Many secret agents and spies were hiding among them, and they also came for various purposes. In addition, there were also challengers from all over the world who came for the upcoming fighting competition. The whole of Tianjin had never been so lively. Almost every street had an ability user and foreign tourists. But because of Li Anping's existence, no one dared to take the initiative to cause trouble. No matter how turbulent the situation was on the surface, no one dared to take the initiative to cross that invisible line. Along with the news from the south, the crusade was completely annihilated by Yin Bei and Fang Yuhuang. Their main leader was personally escorted to Tianjin by Fang Yuhuang to await trial. Now that Tianjin had another level 5 ability user, no one dared to cause trouble. However, the overly calm situation was like the calm before the storm. It made everyone in Xia Dragonfinch feel inexplicably uneasy. There were still 3 days before Li Anping ascended the throne. In a dark secret room, the light was suddenly turned on. A man opened his eyes. He wore a black hood on his head, and other than his pair of cold eyes, no one could see his face clearly. His body was clad in a black combat uniform. The moment he woke up, the confusion in his eyes turned into sobriety. The next moment, 3 doors opened at the same time. 3 2-meter-tall crawler robots rushed in from 3 different directions. The man seemed to have expected this. Without any hesitation, he rushed toward one of the robots. In an instant, a hurricane was set off in the secret room. The wind hit the wall and made a clattering sound. Along with the man's impact, the place where he was originally standing cracked, and a large pit was formed. Along with these sounds, the man appeared in front of a robot at a speed that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye, like a bolt of black lightning. Looking at the robot that turned around, he punched it without saying anything. A terrifying force was released with this punch, and it directly rolled up waves of air in midair. With a loud bang, they could clearly see that the man's fist had landed on the robot's chest. First, there was a huge dent. Then there was a wave-like undulation that spread out in all directions with the man's fist as the center. The metal shell instantly turned into countless wrinkles, and then it was torn apart by this terrifying power. As the fist advanced, more metal fragments splattered out. The man's fist was like a giant beast that could devour everything, blasting a terrifying hole in the chest of the huge robot in front of him. At the moment he pulled back his fist, the 2 robots at the side turned around at the same time. Their automatic cannons instantly aimed at the man. Sparks of death lit up, but it was a pity that the bullets could only hit the man's afterimage. As the man ran at high speed in a zigzag pattern, the robots quickly turned their machine guns. However, no matter how fast their reactions were, the splattering sparks could only follow closely behind the man. They were unable to catch up to him. The man could only go around to the back of the robots and finish them off with another punch. Through one of the walls in the secret room, a large group of researchers were fiddling with various machines. The part of the secret room that seemed to be a wall was a layer of glass to them. A white-haired old man said calmly, "How are the numbers of number 73? The assistant looked at the tablet in his hand. The various numbers kept on jumping. They've all reached the values of the mother's sample. The assistant rubbed his eyes and said excitedly, "They've even surpassed the mothers in terms of strength." The white-haired old man sighed. "It's a pity that other than that one time in Jadeite City, we haven't been able to get the target sample again. Otherwise, the numbers we've gotten would be even better." Just then, the man in the secret room was charging toward the 3rd robot. A machine gun bullet brushed past the tip of his nose. Although he was not injured, it still tore through the mask on his face. In the next second, with a boom, the man's entire arm sank into the robot's head. After a series of tremors, the entire robot came to a complete stop. However, as the last robot was destroyed, the man's mask disappeared without a trace. It was torn into 2 and fell to the ground, completely exposing the man's head. That was a face that was exactly the same as Li Anping's, but with more coldness and mercilessness, giving off a cold feeling like that of a robot. As the last robot was destroyed, the man's eyes once again regained a look of confusion. He pulled out his arm and stood there motionlessly like an ice-cold statue. As clapping sounds rang out, rows and rows of lights lit up behind the old man. Under the illumination of each row of lights, there were rows of men wearing masks and black combat uniforms. They looked exactly the same, as if they had come down from an assembly line. These men's eyes were tightly shut, and they were fixed on the spot by the metal frame. None of them moved at all. At first glance, they were like rows and rows of statues, emitting waves of cold air. If one were to zoom in through the lens, they would be able to see that the entire secret room was built within a huge container cruise ship. On the deck of the cruise ship, there were soldiers armed with live ammunition standing everywhere. In the surroundings of the cruise ship, there were 7 container cruise ships of the same size. On the bow of each cruise ship, there was a huge violet painted on it. There was a total of 8 container cruise ships that weighed over 10,000 tons, and they were slowly heading toward the east of the 5-star ocean. The white-haired old man said calmly, "Have all the modifications been completed? All the subsidiary bodies are ready. What about the League of Stars? Has the money been transferred over?" The assistant did not expect this question. He was stunned for a moment before saying, I don't think so. Go and urge them. Also, how far are we from Disya?" The assistant tapped on the tablet a few times and said, "There's still about 800 plus kilometers. Taking into account the time spent on land, we should be able to reach there on time." Hee hee. The white-haired old man's face revealed a hint of cruelty. "Then let this battle be a good test for my babies." Chapter 306. There were still 2 days before Li Onping's ascension to the throne. In an underground karst cave in the Western Land, in the canonization province of the Code Country, loud and clear hymns rang throughout the entire underground space. In a huge square, there were thousands of men wearing metal power armors. They were the holy knights of the Order of Universal Truth. At this moment, they were kneeling on one knee at the same time, their hands clasped before their chests, as they quietly prayed toward the holy statue in the middle of the square. The thousands of holy knights were speaking in unison. Together with the hymns in the space, they gave off a strange and holy feeling. What are we? Swords and short spears. What are we? Slaying all evil spirits in the darkness. What are we asking for? We implore the Lord to be merciful. We are willing to go to hell together and wipe out all the evil of mankind. Accompanied by the thousands of people praying in unison, 3 tall and big men slowly walked toward the holy statue in the middle. They were wearing black cloaks that shrouded their entire bodies. Even so, with each of their footsteps, the sound of metal clashing could still be heard. These 3 people were the commander and deputy commander of the Holy Knights. Right now, in the underground karst cave, other than the knights who had been led by Deputy Commander Kron to the New Eastern Sun, but had been completely wiped out, the 4,454 Holy Knights of the Order of Universal Truth had all arrived. Accompanied by waves of prayers, the atmosphere became increasingly feverish. Under the illumination of the lights, the shadows under the feet of the Holy Knights danced wildly like demons. The 3 men who were covered in cloaks finally walked up to the holy statue. The person in the lead gently lifted the cloak covering his head, revealing a head of platinum hair. It was a very rare hair color. In this dim cave, it even emitted a faint fluorescent light, giving the man a feeling of holiness. Under the prayers of the 4,454 holy knights, he slowly knelt down on one knee and reached out his hands under the cloak. It was a pair of very clean and powerful hands, as if they were not stained by the dust of the world. Right now, this pair of clean hands was gently pressed onto the ground. It was as if a holy angel had come to the mortal world. At the instant his hands came into contact with the ground, 9 streams of gray psychic chi gushed out from the ground. The 9 streams of psychic energy were like 9 gates leading to the endless underground world. They opened up 9 tunnels on the ground that could only allow one person to pass through at a time. Among the superpowers, the strongest known superpower, the Netherworld Kingdom, was activated at this moment. Just as this ability was activated, the surrounding prayers became louder and louder, as if a holy war was about to begin. Every temple knight had a fanatical smile on his face. We pray for the blessings of heaven. Until the end of the earth, everything belongs to the Master. We are the divine punishers of earth. With the wrath of heaven, burn away all the sins of the world. Something seemed to be rising from the 9 pitch-black tunnels. As the knights prayed, more spiritual chi was injected into the tunnels from the man's body. A terrifying roar came from the depths of the tunnel, and a pitch-black palm stretched out from the tunnel. The entire surface of the tunnel seemed to be covered by a layer of invisible barrier, and the palm forcefully squeezed through the thin layer of black barrier. First it was the hand, then the arm, the shoulder, and even the head. The thing that was trying to squeeze out of the tunnel was a person. However, no matter how hard that person tried, the black membrane did not break. It was like a layer of firm plastic wrap, tightly wrapping around the surface of the figure, making him look like a pitch-black ghost that was furiously trying to climb out from hell. Seeing this situation, the man who activated the ability suddenly let out a low bellow, and more psychic energy gushed out from the tunnel. As more psychic energy gushed out, the black ghost seemed to have received a boost, and it suddenly rushed up. There was a puffed sound, as if the world's barrier had been broken. The layer of black membrane suddenly burst open, and the figure under the membrane instantly squeezed out from the tunnel. Then there were 8 consecutive sounds, and a total of 9 people squeezed out from the tunnel. They were naked from head to toe, and their skin was a strange gray color. Their eyes, in particular, had no pupils at all and were completely white. The man who crawled out at the front slowly stood up. He scratched his head and mumbled, "Where is this place? I remember that I was with Lianping. You're already dead." The man who crawled up had a look of disbelief on his face. He looked at the golden-haired knight and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? Who are you? Where's this place? Do you know that I'm the Xia Dragonfinch's 5th-level ability user, Songbang?" The knight smiled. "My name is Paladin, the great commander of the Knights Templar. Songbang, you're already dead, but I've pulled you back into the human world. Although you will only stay for 3 days, you will have a chance to take revenge." However, Songbang did not pay attention to him. Instead, he stared blankly at his own gray body and said to himself in disbelief, "I'm dead. I'm actually dead." The other 8 people were all attracted by the conversation between the two. Seeing that they all looked over, Paladin smiled and said, "Everyone, you should still remember how you died, right? Songbang, Lady, Blood Demon, Zhurong, Pluto, Qilin King, Samuel, and Kron." Following Paladin's name-calling, the people in front of him looked over one after another. "More or less, you all died at the hands of Lianping. And now, I've awakened you from hell to give you a chance to take revenge." Qilin King snorted coldly and said with an unruly expression, "What if I say no?" Paladin shook his head and lightly snapped his fingers. Qilin King's expression immediately changed. A black substance emerged from the ground, and like layers of mud, it moved up along Qilin King's legs, gradually wrapping him up completely. Finally, it completely dragged him back into the underground passage, and he completely disappeared. Paladin said coldly, "Then, is there anyone else who disagrees?" The remaining 8 people, apart from Kron, who had a look of reverence, had different expressions, but no one objected. Thus, the Knights Templar gave the 8 5th-level ability users clothes and armor. However, with their ashen faces and pure white eyes, they looked more like zombies than humans. Then, each of them was given a set of information, which recorded some of the things that happened after they died, as well as a rough estimate of Lianping's current strength. Among them, Songbang's reaction was the biggest. His expression continuously changed, and he cried out, "How is this possible? Lianping, that bastard, how could? As for the Thunder Emperor and the Blood Demon, their reactions were similarly unsightly. They never thought that after they died, the world would actually undergo such a huge change. Furthermore, Lianping's strength had increased rapidly, reaching an unbelievable level. In comparison, The other ability users who died later on weren't as shocked. After all, when they were killed, Li Onping's strength was already extremely shocking. However, Xia's development in the past year, as well as the strength Li Onping displayed in New Danyang, was still enough to shock them. Hell King said coldly, including the 8 of us who died here, and the 3 of you, there are a total of 11 5th-level ability users. However, even if this is the case, it still might not be enough to deal with the current Li Onping. Behind Paladin, a man also removed his cloak. This middle-aged man had a head of silver hair and a pair of eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything. He was precisely one of the 3 vice commanders of the Knights Templar, God's Eye Walford. That is precisely the case. Even with everyone's strength, they might not be able to win against the current Li Onping. Moreover, as time passes, his strength will become more and more powerful, and we don't have much time left. That is why we must seize the time. The sooner we eliminate him, the lower the danger. Moreover, this time, we are not the only ones besieging Li Onping. After hearing these words, Hell King and the others' expressions all changed. However, Walford didn't care either. He suddenly turned his head, looking towards a crowd. Over there. Following Walford's words, Tang Weihan, who was disguised in the crowd, felt his heart palpitate, feeling as if his heartbeat had stopped at this moment. In front of him, there were 11 5th-level ability users. Just as he was feeling lucky, Walford actually directly walked towards him. Without any hesitation, without any pause, he directly walked in front of Tang Weihan. Meanwhile, behind him, the other 10 5th-level ability users looked over at the same time. Feeling these monsters' gazes, Tang Weihan's heart sank. Chapter 307. On the day of the Ascension Ceremony, 5 in the morning. In the sky, 200 kilometers away from the eastern continent's west coast, a rectangular flying ship that was more than 1 kilometer in length, resembling a black coffin, was slowly heading in the direction of Great Xia. At the very front of the flying ship, at the edge of the roof, Shang Zhenhai was sitting there defenselessly. His feet were out of the edge of the flying ship, and a gust of wind blew over, making it seem like he would fall off at any moment. Behind him, a tall white man was slowly walking over. It was the level 5 ability user who had represented the League of Stars on a diplomatic mission to Xia, Solomon. However, at this moment, his face was no longer as spirited as before. Instead, it was filled with exhaustion. Only when he saw Shang Zhenhai's back did he see a hint of confidence in his eyes. "I've been looking for you everywhere. Why did you come here?" Shang Zhenhai said calmly. "It's nothing. I just suddenly wanted to see the sunrise over the sea. I've been on the ship for so long, but I haven't had the time to enjoy it yet." "Is that so?" Solomon smiled and sat down next to Shang Zhenhai. "It's indeed a beautiful scene." After saying this, the 2 of them fell into silence. After a long while, Solomon took out a milky white gem and handed it to Shang Zhenhai. It was a spiritual gem created by the Heavenly Queen. It could allow the user to possess a level 5 mental force field for 24 hours. "We've all gotten it. This is your share." Shang Zhenhai took the gem and casually put it into his pocket. It seemed like he did not care about it at all. Solomon did not care either. For some reason, he felt that after sitting next to Shang Zhenhai, the nervousness before the battle had disappeared. Originally, as a level 5 ability user, there was basically nothing in the world that could make him feel nervous or afraid. However, their opponent this time was Li Onping, an opponent who was so powerful that it could make people feel despair. In fact, it was not just him. Most of the people on the ship were very nervous, including Titan, White Short Star, and Yulia, who had the sure hit gun, and other level 5 ability users. They more or less felt this emotion that they had not felt for a long time. This was especially true for him, White Short Star, and Yulia. As aptitude users who had personally fought Li Onping, they could clearly feel the despair-inducing power of his opponent. But for some reason, Solomon found that as long as he stood beside Shang Zhenhai, the nervousness and fear would gradually fade away. It seemed that Li Onping wasn't that scary anymore. Looking at Shang Zhenhai's calm appearance, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you afraid?" Shang Jinhai looked at him in confusion, then turned to look at the sea and asked casually, "Why should I be afraid?" Solomon organized his thoughts and said slowly, "Our main force this time is mainly high-level aptitude users and mechanical soldiers. However, mechanical soldiers can only be used to suppress normal aptitude users and the army. Aptitude users like me, White Short Star, and Titan can't do anything to Li Onping even if we reach level 5. The main force to deal with Li Onping this time is you, Yulia, and Barnes. Look at Yulia. She's been so nervous that she hasn't eaten for an entire day." Just as Solomon was talking nonstop, Shang Jinhai patted him lightly on the shoulder and said, "Look, the sun has risen." Hearing that, Solomon looked over and saw a bright light piercing through the darkness in the sky. Then a burning fireball slowly rose from the bottom of the sea, illuminating a large part of the sky red. Seeing such a beautiful scene of nature, Solomon stopped talking and quietly watched as the sun slowly rose from the horizon. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, Solomon suddenly let out a surprised gasp. The sun in the sky had not changed at all. It was as if it had been maintaining the state of being at the beginning of the day, not moving at all. It was not just the sun. Solomon raised his head and looked around, noticing that everything in his surroundings seemed to have come to a standstill. It was only because he was in the sky and the surroundings were too empty that he had only noticed it now. Be it the flowing clouds in the sky, the light from the sun, the arc under his feet, or the sea below, everything had fallen into absolute stillness at this moment. Not a single sound could be heard in the world. Solomon suddenly turned his head and looked at his shoulder, where Shang Jinhai's palm was resting. He asked, "You used your ability on me?" Shang Jinhai shook his head. "I didn't use my ability on you." After saying that, Shang Jinhai reached his hand back. Solomon felt his vision blur, and the entire world seemed to have returned to normal at this moment. The clouds in the sky started to flow, and the light from the sun started to change. It was as if everything in the surroundings had come to life again. Solomon shook his head. "Your ability is too strange. I still can't understand it. However, Li Onping shouldn't be able to understand it either." Shang Jinhai did not say anything. He just looked in the direction of the sunrise and quietly observed the rare scenery before him. Just then, their communication devices rang. Solomon picked them up and took a look. He said, "Let's go. It's time to gather. The League leader wants us to go over." As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Shang Jinhai, who was beside him, but he realized that Shang Jinhai had already disappeared. Solomon shook his head and slowly walked toward the meeting room. When he entered the meeting room, he realized that everyone was present except for the Heavenly Queen. Including him, there were a total of 6 of the League of Stars' strongest ability users. Other than the ability users, there were also 12 humanoid mechs that were about 3 meters tall and had a metallic luster all over their bodies, standing in the corner of the meeting room. These metal figures looked perfect and flawless. They looked like enlarged versions of humans. They were not wearing any armor, and their skin was silvery white in color. Every line on their bodies and the shape of their muscles gave off a feeling of boundless power. Solomon knew that these 12 mechanical soldiers were no small matter. The League of Stars spent more than 10 years of effort, using adamantium as the main material, gathering countless worlds' leading technology to create these ultimate soldiers. It was to the extent where if it wasn't for the enormous pressure Li Onping gave them, making the entire League of Stars put in all of their effort this year, they wouldn't have been able to create these 12 ultimate weapons. Not a single one of their fighting strength was below a level 5 ability user. It was to the extent where as long as they had enough energy, more than half of the level 5 ability users might not be able to do anything to them. Meanwhile, their production costs were similarly high. Adamantium alone was already a resource that couldn't be replenished. Together with the technology and all types of top-quality materials it contained, its value was difficult to estimate. Even if a normal small country used up all of its resources, it would still be difficult to create one. However, even if it was such a powerful war weapon, in today's battle, it still wouldn't be able to become the main character. Just as Solomon was thinking about these things, the door to the conference room opened again. The leader of the League of Stars, the world's only level 6 ability user, finally appeared. However, it wasn't only the Empress who appeared in the conference room. Behind the Empress, there was also a white-haired, skinny old man, currently looking at everyone with a cold smile. Yulia frowned and said, "Leader, who is this old man? This time we don't have time to take care of the old, weak, sick, and disabled." However, Titan on the side stopped him from continuing, instead looking at the old man with an expression of disbelief, muttering, "Demir Tanner?" The old man smiled evilly, giving the Empress a look and said, "I didn't expect that even now there would still be people who recognize me." Hearing him personally admit it, the expressions of the level 5 ability users on the side all changed. The world's first level 5 ability user, a mobile natural disaster, relying on his own strength to cause the deaths of tens of millions of people. Any one of these was enough to make people unforgettable for life. White Short Star was the first to say unhappily, "Demir Tanner? Empress, are you crazy? Let this homicidal maniac join us?" "I don't agree." Solomon also said, "He's too uncontrollable. Who knows if he'll suddenly go crazy and start a massacre." The Empress stopped them from continuing, calmly saying, "There's nothing to discuss about this matter. He will join our operation this time, and I guarantee that he definitely won't do anything that's disadvantageous to you all. Everyone get ready. Violet, the Knights, and the imaginary organization are all here. There's still 6 hours before the operation begins." Chapter 308. Tianjing, Imperial Palace. 11 o'clock in the morning. There were still 2 hours before the coronation officially began. Inside the palace, there were busy women everywhere. Xiao Shuesu was wearing an earpiece, and she was commanding the group of women in the palace. "You guys go and see how the Imperial Guard uniforms are. Are there any problems? The orchestra is here. Let them go to the hall first. Prepare lunch for them and let them eat first." A maid came to Xiao Shuesu with a bouquet of flowers. She immediately shouted, "What are you doing?" She snatched the bouquet from the maid's hand. "I said that the plaza must be golden. Don't you understand? This is yellow, not golden." She shook her head and let the maid continue with her work. She casually threw the bouquet into the trash can at the side. At this moment, she realized that the people around her had all stopped. She seemed to have realized something. She suddenly turned around and saw Li Onping standing behind her. Behind him were Jin Guang, Yin Bei, and a few other young Dragon Sparrow guards. "Your Majesty." Xiao Shuisu lowered her head and bowed. "Please change into your uniform quickly. The coronation is about to begin." Li Onping looked around and realized that Jin Guang, Yin Bei, and the rest were all wearing their uniforms today. They looked like handsome young men, more like celebrities than soldiers. After all, they were going to follow Li Onping around the city today and then be broadcasted on TV. Anyway, their main purpose was to put on an act. It was impossible for them to really protect Li Onping. Therefore, when they were choosing, Xiao Shuesu and Lu Sheng both chose the more good-looking aptitude users. Li Onping nodded at Xiao Shuesu. Although he did not like to dress too grandly, he knew that at this moment, it was not just for himself. There were too many people who spent their efforts on this, so he would not refuse. Under Xiao Shuesu's lead, Li Onping went directly to the changing room. He stood on a huge floor-to-ceiling mirror, just like that. There were a total of 3 staff members helping him put on his suit, and there was also a makeup artist and hairstylist helping him with his appearance. Looking at himself in the mirror, as if he had been beautified, Li Onping couldn't help but smile. With a slight smile and a slight shrug of his shoulders, the entire back of the gown was torn apart with a loud crash. The 3 women who were helping him put on the gown immediately jumped and wanted to lower their heads and apologize. Xiao Shusu, who was at the side, hurriedly said, "Bring another set over. Hurry up." As she gave out orders, she said respectfully to Li Onping, "Your Majesty, please restrain your powers. We've already used the best materials for these clothes." All right, I got it. Li Onping nodded to show that he understood. After all, Li Onping usually wore the atmospheric armor created by the field of nothingness. He was used to a relaxed state, and the formal attire was heavy and tight. Li Onping was naturally not used to it. However, he did his best to restrain his power, and, as expected, such a thing did not happen again. Yin Bei and Jing Guang stood at the side. There was nothing much to say between the two of them. However, the maids at the side couldn't help but glance at them and whisper to each other. Finally, one of the slightly plump girls walked towards the two of them under the urging of the crowd. She looked at Jing Guang's handsome face and said excitedly, "Lord Jing Guang, can you give me an autograph?" Jing Guang looked at her and then at the maids who were filled with anticipation. He said helplessly, "I didn't bring a pen. It's fine, I brought it." She took out a notebook and pen from her bosom and handed them to Jing Guang. Jing Guang had no choice but to take the notebook and sign it. "What do you want to write it?" "Here is good." The girl looked at Jing Guang as if her eyes were filled with little stars. She asked excitedly, "Lord Jing Guang, will you be participating in the combat competition next week? If you participate, you will definitely be able to take first place in the ability user category. The team has a rule that the Dragon Sparrow Guards are not allowed to participate. I won't be going." With that said, Jing Guang handed the notebook and pen with his signature to the girl. The girl accepted it happily. "Thank you, Lord. I will definitely save it as a family heirloom." Seeing the girl skipping away, Yin Bei said with disdain, "How easy to be an idol." Jing Guang snorted and replied, "I'm not as shameful as your ability." Yin Bei stared at Jing Guang and shouted, "What did you say?" Yin Bei and Jing Guang had fought for the first time and even caused Yin Bei to fail his mission. This made Yin Bei, who had always thought that he was invincible, very unhappy. Although they had joined the Xia Dragonfinch together, their relationship had never improved. They had always been in charge of their own things, and each had their own group of supporters. Although Yin Bei was good-looking, his ability was to collapse, which was a one-hit kill. The fewer people who knew about it, the better. Therefore, he was not suitable for publicity. Hearing Yin Bei's words, Jing Guang sneered. "I heard that you guys relied on Feng Yuhuang's ability to defeat the Holy War in Nanjiang. You've really made us proud." Yin Bei laughed. "At least I caught Peter Parker. You followed him for a few months and still didn't succeed, right?" The young members behind them saw that the two of them were getting more and more hostile, but there was nothing they could do. These two seniors were not people they could control. Just then, Li Onping, who was in front of the mirror, turned his head and shouted at Jing Guang, "Hey, come here. The makeup artist wants to touch up your makeup." "Touch up my makeup?" Jing Guang frowned. "There's no need. Hurry." Li Onping only added one word. Jing Guang had no choice but to walk towards the makeup artist. Yin Bei patted his shoulder and said in disdain, "Go, pretty boy." Just then, Li Onping shouted again, "Yin Bei." Yin Bei's body froze. Li Onping hooked his finger at him. "You come here too." Yin Bei was not like Jing Guang, who dared to refute Li Onping. He could still clearly remember that he was slapped to the ground by Li Onping like a pancake. The pain all over his body was still fresh in his mind. Hence, he was much more afraid of Li Onping than Jing Guang. When he heard the other party's order, he did not dare to say anything and just followed. More than an hour later, Jing Guang and Yin Bei walked out of the changing room behind Li Onping. At this moment, they were wearing complicated black and red formal wear. Coupled with their meticulously groomed hair and faces, they did indeed look more elegant than before. Just then, Scorpion walked in front of Li Onping and said slowly, "Your Majesty, the team is waiting for you at the West Gate." Li Onping asked, "Are you on duty today?" Scorpion bowed and said, "Yes, but Audrey is also here. After all, today's event is very important. All the team members who are on vacation are back." Although there was Li Onping's suppression and nothing could happen to the entire Tianjing, there were still Imperial Guards in the palace. Scorpion was transferred to the palace to be in charge of the Imperial Guards with Audrey. It was a position with real power and good treatment. Scorpion, who was married, was very satisfied with it because he did not have to fight on the front line for a long time. Li Onping patted Scorpion's shoulder and said, "Do your job well." Then he got in a car and drove toward the west gate of the palace. According to the plan, they would start there and parade around Tianjin. Then they would return to the east gate of the palace and hold the formal ceremony in the auditorium in front of the palace. The coronation ceremony was expected to end in 4 hours. Li Onping, who was sitting in the car, looked at the palace outside the window and asked, "Is everyone here? Is there any news?" Yanbei looked at the computer in the car and reported to Li Onping, "Our people are all here, but Lord Xinghe's plane is late. He might be a little late." Li Onping asked again, "Federation, Code State, and Tyrol, are they all behaving?" Yanbei nodded. According to the information from the intelligence department, the 3 countries did not do anything unusual. Their envoys are all here. They should be waiting in the auditorium to watch the ceremony. Li Onping nodded. Whether it was the information from the intelligence department or his ears and eyes, everything was normal and there was no danger. But with the amazing intuition that he had gained from countless battles, Li Onping faintly felt that things were not so simple. Chapter 309. Tianjin, 12th Avenue. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both sides of the avenue were bustling with people, and the road in the middle was blocked by horizontal strips. The similar road was more than 10 kilometers long, and it was the route Li Onping would take for the parade. The ordinary people of Xia, as well as the foreigners who came to Xia for vacation, were all standing on both sides of the road, waiting to watch the parade. Helicopters flew by from time to time in the sky, and they were all reporters from TV stations. They were ready to film the parade from the sky and broadcast it live from the beginning to the end. On the streets where the parade was taking place, there was a policeman standing every few meters, ready to maintain law and order. Xilan, who came from a small country, and his master were also standing on the streets, looking at the excited crowd around them. They were curious and expectant. Unlike most ordinary people, the most important reason why an ability user like him came to watch the parade was to see Li Onping, the man who was currently recognized as the strongest in the world and had godlike powers. He was like a high mountain, enough for countless ability users to look up to. As one of the ability users, Xilan naturally wanted to see what Li Onping looked like with his own eyes. This was completely different from watching TV. Xilan looked at the increasing crowd around them and sighed. There are so many people here. Even during the New Year, we don't have so many people in Xia. His master said, "Of course. Our whole country only has a population of about 2 million people, while in Xia, Tianjin has a permanent population of more than 30 million people. Including the foreigners who came here today, this situation will probably continue for a few days." However, although there were many people, the 2 of them were wrapped in a faint layer of psychic energy. Although the ordinary people around them were very close to them, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't really squeeze them. They were like 2 reefs in the middle of the ocean. No matter how strong the wind or the rain was, they just stood there. His master suddenly thought of something and reminded him, "Oh right, when Li Onping appears later, don't use your psychic energy to sweep him. Do you understand?" Xilan said impatiently, I know. The ambassador has said it so many times that I'm getting calluses on my ears." His master shook his head. Although he talked a lot of nonsense, he's right this time. It's good that you remembered. Xilan nodded casually. Suddenly, she narrowed her eyes and pointed across the street. "Master, look, that person is so strange." His master looked in the direction that Xilan was pointing at and saw a man in a black coat walking slowly among the crowd. The reason why he was called strange was because he looked very strange. Although he wore a hat and a coat, his gray skin could still be vaguely seen under his clothes. Currently, there were no humans with gray skin. However, his master didn't find it strange. He just said he should be a bloodline or mutant metahuman. There are so many metahumans in Tianjin now. You can see all kinds of people. Although Xilan agreed with her teacher, she still felt that the man was very strange. However, when he turned his head to look again, the man had already disappeared. On the other side, the strange gray-skinned man passed through the crowd and walked into an empty alley. Behind him, a policeman patted his colleague and said, "That guy's a little strange." "Which guy?" "Forget it, I'll go take a look." After saying that, he followed in. The policeman turned into the empty alley and saw a man walking slowly in front of him. "Hey, wait a minute." The policeman quickly caught up and stopped 2 meters behind the strange man. He put one hand on the gun at his waist and asked, "You're a metahuman? Have you registered?" The man didn't say anything. He just lowered his head and slowly turned around. "Hey, I'm asking you a question." The policeman saw the gray skin on the man's chin. He frowned and said, "What's the matter with you? Take off your hat." The man smiled and slowly raised his hand to take off his hat. With this action, his entire face was exposed in front of the man. It was a face like that of a dead person. His cheeks were gray, and his eyes were pure white without pupils. He didn't even need to put on any makeup to act in a zombie movie. It was obvious that this was the first time the policeman had seen such a horrifying face. He subconsciously took a step back. However, he seemed to realize that it wasn't very polite. Just as he was about to say something, he realized that the man had already rushed toward him. When he pulled out the gun at his waist halfway, the man's gray palm had already covered his entire face. At the next moment, his entire body seemed to have been twisted into a ball of dough and was sucked into the man's palm. When he opened his eyes once again, he could only see a gray sky and a blood-colored moon hanging in the sky. Before him stood several thousand Knights Templar who were wearing power armors and holding chain words. At the instant the policeman went missing, this piece of information had been passed up at an extremely fast speed. First, his colleagues reported to their superiors, and then the policeman reported to Desya Dragonfinch. Therefore, 5 minutes later, the 2 Dragon Sparrow Guard were sent to the alley where the incident had happened. However, the other party had done it very cleanly. The policeman didn't leave anything behind. After some investigation, the 2 Dragon Sparrow Guards didn't discover anything. The missing policeman was still nowhere to be found. Therefore, they applied to use the intelligence network. This information was directly uploaded to Lu Feng and Lu Sheng. They quickly approved the request and forwarded the application to Momo. In the depths of Desya Dragonfinch's base, Momo connected the chi on his finger to the supercomputer and was working on a new task. When he suddenly received an application to use the intelligence network, he didn't think too much about it and directly entered the name of the missing policeman into the intelligence network. Government personnel like this, and they were all in Tianjing, were all monitored by Li Qian's ability. Wang Zheng. As he muttered the name, information about Wang Zheng immediately popped up on the screen. Wang Zheng had a sunny-side-up egg and bread in the morning, then began to prepare for the security mission during the parade. Momo quickly scrolled down. He directly jumped to the end, wanting to see where he went missing. Wang Zheng followed Pluto to the alley. Pluto sucked Wang Zheng into the underworld. Reading up to this point, Momo's breathing became heavy. Wang Zheng was pierced through the chest by Night Claude of the Knights Templar. Wang Zheng is dead. Momo looked at the information in disbelief and shouted, "How is this possible? Pluto should be dead. How did he appear again? Could it be someone with the same name? No, there's the underworld. Could it really be Pluto?" At this moment, the supercomputer suddenly sounded an alarm. "What's going on?" Momo looked at the screen with a serious expression. Under his operation, a large number of numbers appeared on the screen like a waterfall. The information displayed on the screen indicated that the entire Tianjing had begun to experience a large-scale power outage. Just as the higher-ups of Desya Dragonfinch began to investigate the abnormality in front of them, Li Onping stood on a custom-made car and began the parade. He had a smile on his face and waved to the people on both sides of the street. Every time he waved, there would be a large wave of cheers. However, when Desya Dragonfinch discovered Pluto's existence and saw a large-scale power outage in the city, he did not show any change on his face, but his heart was filled with killing intent. Terrifying psychic energy instantly gushed out of his body and spread out in all directions like a tsunami. In the eyes of ordinary people, Li Onping was still Li Onping. However, in the eyes of ability users, Li Onping was like the incarnation of hell at this moment. The psychic energy rushed over with strong malice and slaughtered hundreds of millions of people. At this moment, Li Onping's psychic energy seemed to carry a heavy smell of blood. Jin Guang and Yin Bei's faces turned pale. They felt as if they had walked in front of the gates of hell. Li Onping was not targeting them. He was simply checking the situation around him. Some of the ordinary ability users on the street were even worse. They were either pale or trembling. It was as if they were crawling in front of the only king in the world. They were deeply afraid that if they did anything that crossed the line, they would be attacked like thunder. On a tall building 500 meters away from Li Onping, Shang Jinhai looked at the black psychic energy in the air, and his heart sank. We've been exposed. Which bastard is so careless? He turned his head and looked to the side. Yulia was holding a huge sniper rifle that was more than 2 meters long and aiming it at Li Onping's direction. Shang Jinhai looked at the psychic energy that was close at hand and was about to sweep over them. He did not care if Li Onping heard him and shouted, "Yulia!" Damn it, I know. Yulia was so nervous that her forehead was covered in sweat. She aimed the scope at Li Onping's forehead. The next moment, Li Onping turned his head and looked at her direction. His expression was as if he could really see her 500 meters away. Just one look was enough to make Yulia's heart skip a beat. Go to hell for this old lady. Monster! The trigger was pulled. Following Yulia's angry roar, the bullet that was sure to hit was already out of the chamber. The gunshot rang through several streets. With this shot, it also meant that the battle of the century that belonged to the strongest force of mankind had begun. The strong lost, and the stronger won. This was a battle that belonged to the strong. Chapter 310. When people heard the gunshot, their reactions would be different. Ordinary people's first reaction would naturally be to run away, but police officers or ability users who had received training would first determine the location where the gunshot came from and then choose to take cover. Before the gunshot rang out, Li Onping had already seen Yulia's location. He could see her eyes, her face, and even every pore on her cheeks. Almost at the same time he saw the sniper rifle in her hands. Li Onping's brain had already calculated where the other party's muzzle was aimed at. Therefore, almost at the same time Yulia pulled the trigger, he had already put his right hand in front of his forehead. However, it was useless. It was because Yulia's sure-hit shot did not require any trajectory, nor did it need any barriers. The moment the trigger was pulled, it meant that it had hit. The moment the bullet left the chamber, it had already arrived before Li Onping. It ignored the psychic chi, the nihility force field, and Li Onping's right hand. It ignored all the obstacles between the two and directly came into contact with Li Onping's forehead at 0 distance. Hit, penetration, thermal energy, electromagnetic, and radiation. None of the powerful attacks that Yulia had imagined came. The bullet that had hit Li Onping's forehead only splattered out a little bit of blood. Blood? The smell of blood came from Li Onping's nose. However, while the bullet from earlier might be able to pierce through an ordinary person's head, it would definitely not be able to break through Li Onping's skin. Then where did the blood come from? Smelling the smell of blood, Li Onping instantly reacted. This isn't my blood. It's just for the blood to splatter on me? Is this the prerequisite for activating some kind of ability? On the other side, after the bullet hit Li Onping, Yulia and Shang Jinhai both looked at the person standing behind them. It was a tall and slender woman with wheat-colored skin and many small braids on her head. Activate the ability. Ban is quick. The woman called Banis put her palms together, and the psychic chi on her body started to burn fiercely in an instant. It was as if she was going to activate the ability in the next moment. When he realized that blood was the prerequisite for the other party to activate the ability, Li Onping had already bent his leg slightly. He did not waste time trying to determine what the other party's ability was or how to break this ability. It was because he knew that no matter how powerful the ability was, as long as the ability user died, it would lose its effect. Therefore, before anyone in the surroundings could react, before they realized that there was a gunshot, Li Onping had already leaped lightly and flew in the direction where Shang Jinhai was. With a loud bang, The car under Li Onping's feet had turned into a pile of scrap metal. He himself had crossed over 500 meters and appeared in front of Shang Jinhai and the other two. Yulia, Shang Jinhai, and Shang Jinhai Jinhai Julius. Julia's Yulia, Yulia's Yulia, Yulia, Psychic Yu. So, after appearing in front of the three of them, Li Onping directly withdrew his arm, bent his elbow, and threw a straight punch at Banis. As this punch was thrown, the air instantly became violent, like a mad Tyrannosaurus Rex, and blasted at Banis with enough power to shatter a person's bones. The white blast cut through the sky at this moment, and the terrifying momentum could almost be seen in Tianjin. But after throwing this punch that was enough to change the color of heaven and earth, Li Onping frowned, because this punch did not hit anyone. The moment Li Onping threw his punch, Yulia, Shang Jinbong, and Banis all disappeared. The three of them were like ghosts, disappearing without a trace, causing Li Onping's punch to miss completely. Invisibility? Teleportation? Or some other ability? While thinking of this, Li Onping's psychic qi unscrupulously swept through the space of hundreds of meters around him. He immediately found that the three people who had just disappeared had left the roof of the building and arrived on the 10th floor of the building. Sensing the location of the other party, Li Onping's body shook slightly, and he sprinted to the 10th floor in midair and then rushed in the direction of the three people. Everywhere he passed, there was a series of crackling sounds. Everything, whether it was glass windows, walls, desks, or iron cabinets, was smashed into pieces in an instant. But before Li Onping arrived in front of them, the woman named Banis suddenly shouted, and a small part of her psychic qi dissipated in an instant. The ability was successfully activated. On the other side, after Li Onping rushed into the sky, the surrounding people immediately screamed. Whether it was the gunshots from before, or the situation where Li Onping rushed into the sky and stomped on the cars, it was enough to scare them. Thus, a riot was born. All the ordinary people were like headless flies, running to all the places they thought were safe. At this time, the role of the police began to play. They tried to calm the crowd and reduce the damage. In the position behind Li Onping, Golden Light frowned. Something's wrong. I can't contact the headquarters. Me too. Yin Bei grinned. Looks like there are really people who don't know what's good for them. Golden Light said in a low voice, there's no problem with His Majesty's side. Anyway, calm the crowd first. The next moment, Golden Light's psychic qi surged, and he transformed into his blonde hair and blue eyes, rushing into the crowd. Wherever he passed, everyone was directly pressed to the ground by the majestic psychic qi. Even the aptitude users were not surprised. Faced with the overwhelming psychic qi, no one could withstand it for a moment. The crowd was calmed down as quickly as possible. The riot came and went quickly, but at this time, a shrill scream was suddenly heard from the crowd. Golden Light turned his head and saw that the scream came from a man. A fiercely spinning chainsword slashed at his waist, and then the man was sawed in half like a tree. A man in a power armor raised a chainsword and laughed madly as he slashed through the crowd. Die, pagans! This was like a signal to start. Almost a second after the man's scream ended, a large number of holy knights appeared in the crowd. They were all wearing power armor, holding chainswords, and looked at the crowd with bloodthirsty eyes. He shouted loudly, "Accept the judgment of the Almighty, sinful pagans." Chapter 3:11. In the sky, a silver passenger plane was slowly descending as it flew towards Tianjin Airport. In the spacious cabin, Bai Xinghe was the only one sitting on the chair with his eyes closed. He seemed to be asleep, but every breath he took seemed to cause the air in the cabin to flow. On Bai Xinghe's knees was a silver longsword. The sword was streamlined, and its surface was extremely smooth, like a mirror. It could even reflect the surroundings clearly. Because the blade was cut by hemispatial power, it was extremely sharp. Ordinary people would feel like they were being pricked by needles just by looking at it. The sword was the new 10-fist sword, which had been designed by Li Onping, finalized by Emma, and modified by Bai Xinghe. Bai Xinghe named it Legacy. Just like its name, Bai Xinghe believed that this was a divine sword that could be passed down to the world and be used as a national weapon. Although Bai Xinghe would use the remaining adamantium to forge another sword of 10 fists, he believed that he had spent too much effort on legacy. He was afraid that he would not be able to forge another sword of 10 fists that was better than legacy. This time, he came from New Danyang to attend the coronation ceremony because he wanted to give legacy to Li Anping during the ceremony. At this moment, the entire plain suddenly shook violently. Bai Xinghe suddenly opened his eyes, and 2 one-foot-long beams of blue light shot out from his eyes. The stewardess at the front of the cabin shouted, "Sir, don't be nervous. It's fine. It's just air turbulence." However, Bai Xinghe ignored her. He stood up and tied legacy to his back. Then he waved his hand, and the original sword of 10 fists was sucked into his hand. Seeing Bai Xinghe stand up, the stewardess hurriedly said, "Sir, please sit down immediately. We're landing. It's very dangerous." Bai Xinghe did not say anything. Instead, he held the sword of 10 fists and looked at the ceiling of the plane. Squeaking noises kept coming from the surroundings. Unknowingly, countless blood-red bats had slowly surrounded the entire plane and were gnawing away at it. A terrible explosion sounded from the engines on both sides of the plane, and the whole plane fell from the sky with thick smoke. Then a saber aura flashed, and a giant hole was cut on the top of the plane. Bai Xinghe dashed out of the plane and appeared in midair. "Ha ha! You are Bai Xinghe?" Countless bloody bats left the surface of the plane and flew around Bai Xinghe. At the same time, a man's voice came from the swarm of bats. While Bai Xinghe was falling, he stabbed out the sword of Tatsuka in his hand as fast as lightning. The violent sword aura tore apart the air within hundreds of square meters like a white dragon. The thunderous destructive force minced a large number of bloody bats into pieces. It was the great thunder sword art. An exasperated cry came from the bloodbat. "Bastard, I'll kill you." All the bloodbats were set ablaze. With blood-red flames on their bodies, they swarmed toward Bai Xinghe, who was in midair. "Humph!" Seeing the bloody flames in the sky, Bai Xinghe snorted. The sword of Tatsuka trembled slightly and slowly moved toward the center of the bloody flames. As the sword was pointed out, a chilly aura seemed to descend from the sky and spread out in all directions. Bai Xinghe pointed out the Ice Soul Dark Sword, and the temperature dropped at a terrifying speed. Half of the sky started to snow, and the horrifying coldness swallowed the bloody bats with a momentum that could devour mountains and rivers. The bats that were burning with bloody flames were covered in a layer of frost. Then, their movements became slower and slower. Even the bloody flames on their bodies were gradually extinguished. In just 2 to 3 seconds, they were frozen into ice shards and fell to the ground. Seeing that the coldness was spreading, the remaining bats quickly retreated. The blood demon's panicked voice rang out. "Samuel, what are you waiting for? My blood energy is about to run out." It turned out that all of the blood demon's moves required blood as the material. However, he had not been revived for long. Even though he had killed thousands of civilians on his way to the airport, the blood he had gathered was still far from enough to be used in a battle between level 5 experts. As the blood demon shouted, a disdainful sneer rang out in the air. A black shadow flashed continuously and appeared behind Bai Xinghe, thrusting the dagger in his hand toward Bai Xinghe. Teleportation? This thought flashed through Bai Xinghe's mind. The Ice Soul Dark Sword did not stop and continued to sweep toward the blood demon with a coldness. Meanwhile, his left hand created a series of sparks and turned into the fiery, divine admonition palm, which he threw out behind him. The blood demon let out a miserable cry. He had already recalled all the bloody bats and was flying toward the ground. Samuel could teleport continuously 10 times in 1 second. He was one of the most difficult opponents to deal with among all the level 5 ability users. The dagger in his hand flew up and down. He was sometimes fast and sometimes slow, sometimes far and sometimes close. He kept on flashing around Bai Xinghe and attacking him. Although Bai Xinghe was proficient in all the secret martial arts that had existed since ancient times, and his combat experience and physique were far superior to Samuel's. He was still unable to take down Samuel, who was teleporting continuously. Dagger, long sword, palm. After a series of rapid exchanges, Bai Xinghe decided to use the Ice Soul Dark Sword again. Endless coldness filled the space around him, making it difficult for Samuel to get close to him. Samuel let out a cold laugh and was no longer in a hurry to attack. Instead, he flashed a few times and landed on the ground. As it turned out, the three of them had been fighting for a long time. They were now less than 100 meters away from the ground. Just as Bai Xinghe was about to land on the ground and turn into a pile of meat paste, a whirlwind suddenly appeared under his feet, slowing him down. He landed diagonally in a forest below him. He was using the secret martial art that he and Li Anping had created together, Qi Control Art. However, the moment Bai Xinghe landed, a fist the size of a clay bowl was already smashing toward his chest. A ferocious force was unleashed by the fist, raising a hurricane that blew on Bai Xinghe's face, making him feel suffocated. After a boom, Bai Xinghe launched his great celestial dragon palm at the enemy's fist. However, the force of the palm, which was enough to split mountains, was blown away like snow melting in the spring when it touched the enemy's fist. The ferocious force sent Bai Xinghe flying more than 100 meters away. He knocked down countless trees along the way. When Bai Xinghe stopped, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He felt that his internal organs were churning. Also, he felt excruciating pain in his left hand, which had just taken the opponent's punch. The bones in his hand had been broken. Looking at the man who was walking toward him slowly after throwing a punch, Bai Xinghe said coldly, "It's you?" A hideous smile appeared on Kron's zombie-like face. His right hand, which he had thrown a punch with just now, had completely disappeared. However, weirdly enough, as all kinds of soil particles on the ground gathered around his broken arm, his hand was slowly recovering. "Last time, my body wasn't strong enough to use all my strength," Kron said with a smile. Kron smiled at Bai Xinghe and said, "But this time I'm not afraid of being injured. Are you ready? Bear the weight of the earth." As Kron spoke, Samuel and the blood demon appeared behind Bai Xinghe, staring at each other fiercely. Bai Xinghe frowned. His Majesty hasn't shown up yet. Does this mean that something has happened in Tianjin? He touched the legacy on his back and thought to himself, "Anyway, I'll get rid of these three guys first and hand the legacy to His Majesty." While fierce battles were going on everywhere in Tianjin and Xia Dragonfinch's men were at a disadvantage, Li Anping was still standing in the void, thinking quietly. After the previous tests, this is indeed a space environment. The connection with my psychic clone has been completely cut off. I can't contact Tianjin for now. With the energy reserves in my body, I can survive in a void for about 3,400 years if I only use the most basic life-sustaining method. Just as Li Anping was halfway through his thoughts, suddenly, waves of pressure came from the void again. Li Anping frowned. Again? Are they going to teleport me somewhere else? Or are they going to teleport me back? Chapter 312. Inside the building, Shang Zhenhai, Yulia, and Bannis stood together more than 200 meters away from where Li Anping disappeared, sweat dripping from their chins. Apart from Shang Zhenhai, both Yulia and Bannis' eyes were filled with nervousness. The two of them stared at the spot where Li Anping disappeared, not even daring to blink. Shang Zhenhai stared at the watch on his wrist. There was a countdown starting from 300 seconds, representing the time Li Anping would return. There were only 10 seconds left on the countdown. 10 seconds left. Shang Zhenhai read. Beside him, Yulia and Bannis couldn't help but tense up when they heard it. 5 seconds left. Yulia took a deep breath. The fear and nervousness in her body made her hands tremble uncontrollably. After killing this monster, I must take a year off. 3 seconds left. Shang Zhenhai wasn't as nervous as Yulia and Bannis because he was confident that no matter how strong Li Anping was, even if he couldn't kill Li Anping in this operation, Li Anping wouldn't be able to hurt him. He had countless chances to start over. 2 seconds. Yulia and Bannis couldn't help but hold their breaths. For them, This was a moment of life and death. 1 second. The next moment, Li Onping's blurry figure appeared in his original position again. But the moment he appeared, the entire world seemed to come to a standstill again. The clouds in the sky stopped changing, and the light of the sun stopped moving. Both Yulia and Banis stood motionless like puppets. Shang Jinhai blinked and found that a milky white shockwave had stopped in front of him. It was a shockwave composed entirely of air, and it was from Li Onping's palm strike. Shang Jinhai looked at Li Onping's position and found that he was looking at the three of them and striking out with his palm. The white shockwave from before was the effect of Li Onping's palm strike. Shang Jinhai smiled. Unfortunately, you'll never be able to kill me. Then he walked to Yulia and Banis and grabbed their shoulders, one on the left and one on the right. Ah! The two of them exclaimed and turned from motionless puppets into living people again. Yulia looked at the shockwave that was close at hand and subconsciously stepped back, but she bumped into Shang Jinhai. Banis, on the other hand, stared at the shockwave that seemed to be frozen in midair and Li Onping, who stood motionless, and murmured, "An inviolable boundary. What a godly power." Shang Jinhai said casually, "The present can never change the past, will never be able to catch up to the future. That's the truth." That's right. Banis and Banis, and his aunts and Banis, Yulia and Banis nodded. Shang Jinhai grabbed their shoulders and moved slowly under Yulia's lead. Yulia, on the other hand, held the sniper rifle and adjusted her position. While adjusting her position and looking for an angle to shoot, she couldn't help but look around. Ever since Shang Jinhai activated his ability, she and Banis no longer looked nervous, because they knew that Li Onping couldn't hurt them, at least while Shang Jinhai activated his ability. After adjusting her position, Yulia put the sniper rifle on the ground again and aimed at the motionless Li Onping. Then, she gently pulled the trigger. The sure-hit shot was activated, and the bullet shot out of the barrel in an instant. However, just as it was about to leave the barrel, it immediately stopped and froze at the muzzle. Yulia exhaled. "It's done." Shang Jinhai nodded. "Okay, let's go." When Li Onping returned to Tianjing, he immediately looked at where Shang Jinhai and the other two were. Before the three of them could react, he had already struck out with his palm across the air in their direction. The white shockwave covered a distance of several hundred meters. Not only did it crush everything in its path, but it also broke through the walls and glass of the building and shot toward the street. However, the same thing happened. The moment the shockwave was about to hit Shang Jinhai, the three of them disappeared at the same time. To make matters worse, the same bullet hit Li Onping's forehead, spraying the blood infused in the bullet onto Li Onping's forehead. However, this time around, Li Onping did not hesitate at all. His psychic chi once again shot out in all directions, searching for the three of them. At the same time, a black human silhouette appeared behind him silently. However, before he could make the next move, Li Onping had already disappeared once again, leaving behind only the black psychic chi clone standing on the spot. It was like a pitch-black statue, not moving at all. After feeling a piercing pain in his body, Li Onping's eyes suddenly lit up. He was quite lucky this time around. He had not been sent to the void space of the universe. Instead, he seemed to have arrived on a planet. However, it did not matter. Even though the time he had spent back to Tianjing was only a few seconds, it was more than enough for Li Onping. Although I've summoned the psychic chi clone to Tianjing, I'm still unable to control it after leaving. Is it because the distance is too far? Li Onping's brain started working at a high speed, and many clues flashed past his mind. Although it's a little unbelievable, the basic situation has been clarified. This teleportation ability is the same. It will send me back after about 300 seconds. From the looks of it, I wasn't directly teleported to a black hole. Instead, it should be a random teleportation. Thinking of this, Li Onping sneered. A terrifying power slowly gathered in his right hand. The next time I go back, it should be over. At this moment, a man's voice suddenly sounded behind Li Onping. "Sorry, it seems to be a travel disaster. Do you want me to take care of it?" Lianping turned his head and saw that the one who spoke was a man with silver hair and eyes that were squinted like slits. It's not any known language. Is it a native of an alien planet? It was only then that Lianping started to pay attention to his surroundings. The place he was currently standing on seemed to be a rocky plateau. Other than him, there were 6 other creatures that looked similar to humans standing on this plateau. These 6 human-like creatures seemed to be divided into 2 groups and stood facing each other. As they looked almost no different from humans, Lianping decided to call them humans for the time being. One of the groups consisted of 2 men and a woman, while the other group consisted of 3 men. The silver-haired man who had spoken belonged to the group of 3 men. Other than him, there was also a black man with many braids and a tall man wearing glasses. Their attire was a little strange. Lianping had never seen anything like this in either the eastern or western continents. They all wore long black or white robes, and they wore something that looked like straw sandals. The men also carried long swords in their hands or at their waists. Their style was somewhat similar to the combination of Xia, Baiyu, and Dongyang. Right after the silver-haired man finished speaking, the bespectacled man among the 3 men, who seemed to be the leader, also spoke up. He looked at Lianping and smiled. A real man should sweep the floor with his eyes. What a real man should do is to sweep the floor with his eyes. It doesn't matter. Regardless of whether the dust to be swept away is 1 or 2, the naked I won't be able to tell the difference. Lianping frowned. The time was too short, and there was too little information. He couldn't understand what the other party was saying at all. In fact, he wasn't interested in what the other party was saying. From the other party's attire and the weapons in their hands, the level of development on this planet didn't seem to be very high. The other party might not be able to understand the existence of the universe and planets. Meanwhile, Fang Xingjian only needed to wait here for 5 minutes before he went to deal with Shang Zhenhai and the other 2. He would probably never come to this planet again. Therefore, he had no interest in communicating with the other party at all. Therefore, he decided to just sit there and wait quietly for the 300 seconds to pass. However, the other party clearly didn't think so. Chapter 313. Lianping sat to the side and saw that the man with glasses seemed to be saying something to the 3 people opposite him. Although he didn't really understand what they were talking about, it seemed like the red-haired man and the orange-haired man wanted to protect the woman behind them. The woman wore a red collar around her neck, and her clothes were similar to a white prison uniform. After a few words, they seemed to have broken down. The red-haired man raised the long saber in his hand, seemingly intending to attack. At that moment, Lianping exclaimed softly. The saber in the red-haired man's hand was already broken, but when he raised the broken saber, the broken pieces on the ground floated up on their own and attacked the bespectacled man. The natives of this planet also have superpowers? A hint of interest appeared in Lianping's eyes. However, the battle quickly ended. The bespectacled man's strength far surpassed the red-haired man and the orange-haired man's. Just by wielding his saber and moving at high speeds, he was able to render the 2 powerless to resist. Speed and strength have both broken through 15. In terms of physical fitness alone, he has already reached the combat power of the 5th level. Seeing the red-haired and orange-haired men fall to the ground, the bespectacled man turned around and looked at Lianping. He looked at Lianping and said with a smile, "Stepping over an ant without killing it, this power is very difficult to grasp." After saying that, he took a step forward and appeared behind Lianping. Then, the katana in his hand slashed toward Lianping's back. The saber was so fast that it pierced through the sky like a bolt of lightning. Not only was no one present able to see it, they couldn't even sense whether or not the other party had drawn his saber, and when he had drawn his saber. But, with a clang, the katana slashed down on Lianping's back. However, it stopped an inch away from the surface and could not go any further. At the same time, a huge force rebounded and exploded under their feet. The dust and debris on the ground soared into the sky, leaving behind a huge gully where the katana had cut down. The bespectacled man looked at Lianping, who was unscathed with some surprise. White face, travel misfortune. Amusing travel misfortune. Li Onping frowned, looked at him, and said, "Do you want to die?" Unfortunately, the other party couldn't understand what he was saying, and he wasn't interested in listening to the words of an ant in his eyes. He just put away his katana and pointed at Li Onping. Dao breaker 90 Jin Fu Ku 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 Ku. 90 black coffins of breaking Dao. Following the other party's words, layers of black energy appeared in the space around Li Onping. It was like a mountain of swords, slicing towards Li Onping's body. However, facing this attack that could cut through steel and even seriously injure a level 5 ability user, the seated Li Onping still didn't move at all. He didn't even blink. Meanwhile, that black energy didn't cause him any harm, to the extent where it didn't even break through his atmospheric armor, only leaving a series of ripples on the surface of the armor. Then, under the bespectacled man's shocked expression, Li Onping slowly stood up. Black psychic energy rushed into the sky. It was as powerful as a demonic god, like the sun in the sky, making everyone within 100 li feel a wave of fear. Do you want to die that much? Although the bespectacled man couldn't understand what the other party was saying, he could feel a killing intent that was like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood rushing towards him. He couldn't imagine how many creatures the other party had killed to have such a thick killing intent. However, relying on his many years of battle experience, he still reacted immediately, quickly retreating backwards. However, the only thing he could do was take 3 steps back. After taking 3 steps, a giant fist already descended from the sky, as if the sky was collapsing, directly covering his entire line of sight. Before a wave of suffocating power arrived, it already brushed past the bespectacled man's face through the air. His glasses were the first to shatter, all of his hair flying backwards from the pressure of the air. AI. How is this possible? Faced with this fist, the bespectacled man wanted to dodge, wanted to get out of the way, wanted to use his katana to block it. However, he couldn't do any of these things. The other party's speed already far exceeded the limits of what he knew. If it wasn't for his own strength being great enough, he wouldn't even be able to sense this kind of speed. A loud boom sounded. Li Onping's fist directly hit the bespectacled man's forehead, accompanied by a soft sound. The other party's head had already exploded with a bang. However, before the red and white liquid exploded, it was directly blown away by the violent atmosphere and completely disappeared. After the punch, a terrifying shock wave blew directly from the man's back, plowing along the ground fiercely, accompanied by loud sounds one after another, leaving a huge gully that was several kilometers long. The remaining 5 people all opened their mouths wide, looking at Li Onping in disbelief until the bespectacled man's headless body slowly fell to the ground. Accompanied by a roar, the black man who was with the bespectacled man was the first to react, wanting to attack Li Onping. Noisy. However, just as he was about to draw his katana, Li Onping had already rushed forward, grabbed his neck directly, and lifted him up like a chicken. However, the black man still didn't give up. He waved the katana in his hand, as if wanting to launch an attack, but Li Onping directly broke his neck with a cold snort. A cracking sound came from his neck, and the black man's limbs trembled for a moment. His tightly clenched hand slowly loosened, and the katana fell to the ground. Li Onping casually tossed the black man's corpse to the ground, as if he was casually crushing a bug to death. He glanced sideways, and among the 3 people, the silver-haired man who had spoken first seemed to have disappeared. On the other side, the red-haired and orange-haired men, as well as the women they were protecting, were all looking at Li Onping with a face full of fear. Their eyes revealed obvious fear. Just when Li Onping thought that it was over, 2 more women suddenly flashed to his side, one on the left and one on the right, each holding a katana against him. Then, more and more natives started to surround him. Listening to what they were saying, Li Onping said directly, "I don't understand what you're saying. If you don't want to die, get out of here." Although the other party didn't understand, They seemed to understand the meaning of his threat. One of the women with braids held a katana against him, pushed him, and said a few words that Li Onping didn't understand. They seemed to be threatening him, wanting him to go somewhere with them. In the face of the other party's threat, Li Onping sneered and punched the woman's stomach directly, breaking her into two. A fight broke out in an instant along with this punch. 3 minutes later, Li Onping was still sitting in his original position. However, at this time, there were hundreds of corpses piled up under his butt. Some of them had their heads blown off, some had their bodies crushed, and their limbs broken. There were also many broken swords and blades scattered on the ground. This place seemed to be one of the other party's bases. After Li Onping started his massacre, many more aboriginals rushed over. Among them, there were over 10 who were quite strong, roughly at the level of level 5 ability users. They also had some strange abilities. In particular, there was an old man who used the ability of flames. Li Onping could only deal with him. He punched out a second time, directly turning the old man and his katana into fine powder. Not a single trace of them could be found. Therefore, right now, those aboriginals had all turned into corpses and broken pieces under Li Onping's feet. He sat on the small mound of corpses with a bored expression, counting the time. Li Onping silently calculated in his heart. It should be about time. There's about 20 seconds left. As Li Onping counted silently in his heart, 20 seconds later, he felt waves of power coming from the surroundings of his body again, as if trying to pull his body out of this place. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and the field of nothingness was already accumulating power around his body. At the next moment, Li Onping disappeared completely, as if he had never appeared. Only several hundred corpses were left behind, telling of the calamity that had happened here. Chapter 314. The moment Li Onping returned to Tianjing, he didn't try to attack Shang Zhenhai and the other two, but instead charged downwards, breaking through countless floors and arriving underground. At the same time, the psychic energy incarnation behind him flew backwards, breaking through the glass and arriving in the sky outside the building. In the next moment, in Shang Zhenhai's line of sight, the entire world slowly came to a standstill again. Be it the psychic energy incarnation or Li Onping who charged underground, everything came to a standstill again. Seeing Li Onping disappear from where he was, Shang Zhenhai's expression was a bit unsightly. However, he still grabbed Yulia and Banish's shoulders first, waking them up from their frozen state. Yulia frowned, asking first, "Where's Li Onping?" Shang Zhenhai raised his chin, pointing at the large hole Li Onping made in the ground, saying he charged downwards. While speaking, the 3 level 5 ability users already swept downstairs with their psychic energy, discovering that Li Onping had already charged through 7 floors, including the underground parking lot, as if he had dug a curved underground tunnel, reaching 50 meters underground. Shang Zhenhai's ability had high requirements for reaction time. In particular, in order to deal with a super-fast warrior like Li Onping, he had also specially trained his reaction time. Therefore, from Li Onping's appearance to Shang Zhenhai's reaction and activation of his ability, only half a second had passed. However, it was precisely in this half a second that Li Onping had charged out over 100 meters, 50 of which he had dug out from underground. Yulia urged, "He actually dashed so far? Let's hurry down, otherwise it'll be bad when your ability's duration is up." Banish also nodded, pulling Shang Zhenhai, wanting to go downstairs. However, Shang Zhenhai stopped them, his expression a bit grim. "We can't go down." "Why?" Yulia shouted. "Waiting here is a waste of time. Once he manages to drag out your ability's duration and escapes, we'll all be finished." However, Shang Zhenhai shook his head. "He's hiding underground. There's no light there. You can't see him, nor can you aim at him." Yulia smiled and said, "So what if there's no light? We could just use a flashlight." Seeing Shang Zhenhai looking at her strangely, Yulia frowned and said, "What? Did I say something wrong?" Shang Zhenhai sighed. "Right now, we're the future of the entire universe. All matter for us is the past. Everything we do can become the future after our ability ends, but we can't change the past. Yulia asked. So, it's the same with light. We humans observe objects by light. Light itself, we can't be too fast. But now, we can't feel the lights of sight, of lights. We can't feel the light's ability, feels. Shang Zhenhai explained, that is to say, if there are other things moving in this space, we can't see them. We can only see their past movements. If we go to a dark place now, we won't be able to see anything except darkness. Barnes said, then can't we shine a flashlight over there? I've said this before. In this universe, other than us, everything is still. Light is the same. Even if we dig up the entire ground and expose Li Onping to the sunlight, we still won't be able to see him. We'll only see darkness. Shang Zhenhai's ability was divided into two parts. The part that could be actively used was called the unchangeable world, and the part that could be passively used was called the inviolable boundary. In the universe we live in, time is never absolute. Even if the same creature is in different positions and has different speeds, the flow of time will be different for them. Humans, on the other hand, can only observe the world with their eyes and ears, but they can never observe the creatures who are in the present at the same time as them. That's because light has speed, and so does sound. Whether it's the image you see or the sound you hear, it's all in the past for the observer. All humans can observe is the past. It's just that light and sound are too fast for ordinary people to notice. Shang Zhenhai's unchangeable world, on the other hand, was to make himself an observer of the entire universe. Everything in the world was just the past for him, and he belonged to the future for the entire universe. During the duration of his ability, everything he did couldn't change the past, but he could weave the future. That was Shang Zhenhai's understanding of his ability. When Yulia heard Shang Zhenhai say that it was impossible to see Li Onping no matter what, she frowned even harder. Then what do we do? If we can't see him and aim at him, it's impossible for me to launch my sure-hit bullet. Hearing Yulia's question, Shang Zhenhai touched his chin, and his eyes suddenly changed. How is that possible? What's wrong now? Barnes asked. Shang Zhenhai suddenly said solemnly, Li Onping might already know my ability. Yulia said in disbelief, how is that possible? How many times have you activated your ability? How is it possible for him to understand your ability so quickly? Then why did he run underground? Shang Zhenhai's eyes narrowed. If it was purely to increase the distance, find cover, or to avoid your sure-hit bullet, he had too many ways to do so. But he chose to dig a path underground. Shang Zhenhai said slowly, if he really sensed that my ability is related to time and space, wait, I get it. Understanding flashed across Shang Zhenhai's face. He has his suspicions, but he's not completely sure of my ability yet. He's testing me. He had fought with Yulia before and knew what you're capable of. If we don't attack him underground, then he'll understand that we can't aim at him in the dark. He'll understand that when we suddenly appeared in front of him or disappeared in front of him, it was time that was distorted, not space. Thinking this, Shang Zhenhai sneered. But so what if he knows? Come with me. Let's do it another way. When Li Onping was banished to another world by Shang Zhenhai for the second time, he already had some guesses about Shang Zhenhai's ability. The other party strangely disappeared and suddenly appeared, appearing and disappearing like a ghost in an instant. But every time, he just happened to dodge his ability and attack him. Especially during the second banishment, Li Onping stared at the three of them, but the three of them suddenly disappeared and reappeared without any trace. By the time they appeared, the woman named Yulia had already finished aiming and shooting. Li Onping's first thought was that it was an illusion, or that the other party was faster than him, or that time had stopped. The illusion was immediately ruled out. Then he also understood that it was impossible for the other party's speed to be above his. The key was that he did not see any traces of the other party's movement. If the three of them could really be this fast, then there would be no need for them to fight him so sneakily. The remaining phenomenon that was most consistent with Li Onping's current situation was that time had stopped. However, Li Onping immediately rejected this possibility. The energy that could stop time in the entire universe was enough for the other party to kill Li Onping countless times. There was no need to go through so much trouble. As for regional time stopping, that was even more impossible. That would be equivalent to temporarily stopping the molecular movements of all matter in the surroundings, reaching the concept of absolute zero. After Li Onping ruled out over 10 other possibilities, Li Onping temporarily believed that the other party had not stopped time, but had distorted the space-time he was in, causing the relative time to change. Therefore, after he returned to Tianjing, he immediately rushed underground and hid in the darkness. This was to test to what extent the other party had distorted space-time too. His mental chi clone rushed out of the building. After seeing the position of the sun in the sky and the time on the building, he once again confirmed that the other party did not have the ability to stop time in a region. What was left was to confirm to what extent the other party had distorted space-time too. Space-time was one, and the mass of matter could cause space-time to distort. It was like a bowling ball that had sunk into a sofa. The space-time in the entire universe was distorted by the countless planets. Based on the other party's performance, Li Onping guessed that Shang Zhenhai must have distorted the space-time he was in to achieve an effect similar to time dilation. As for the effects of distortion, that was what Li Onping wanted to confirm next. First of all, to Shang Zhenhai, light was still at the constant speed of light and had become still. This was related to what state Shang Zhenhai was in when he was in the distorted space-time. This was also what Li Onping wanted to confirm. Based on the different results, Li Onping could use different methods to deal with Shang Zhenhai. Therefore, he rushed underground and waited for the other party's reaction. The passageway that Li Onping had dug out was a passageway that led downwards vertically and then horizontally to the right. The instant Li Onping rushed underground, a huge light illuminated the entire horizontal passageway. Li Onping turned back and saw that Shang Zhenhai was holding a huge searchlight and shining it at him. Through the mental chi clone and mental chi's probing, Yulia was standing above Shang Zhenhai's head, above the hole that Li Onping had created. Many thoughts flashed through Li Onping's mind like lightning. You've already used your ability? Does this mean that light is also a still existence to you? His ability has already been used, so it should be on cooldown now. If there was no cooldown for his ability, then the previous incident wouldn't have happened. Yulia is above the hole. Is he trying to lure me over and then hit me again to banish me? Has he forgotten that I have a long-distance attack? As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Li Onping instinctively punched out across space toward where Shang Zhenhai was. Shang Zhenhai did not sense anything. His body was unable to sense this speed, but the thoughts in his mind were no less than Li Onping's. He'll definitely attack me. When I came here and shone the light on him, he should have already confirmed the hypothesis that I have an ability similar to time stop. Regardless of whether he has thought of the problem of the interval between the usage of his ability, in order to prevent me from escaping, he'll definitely attack me at the first instant out of instinct. As long as you attack me, you'll definitely lose, Li Onping. You'll definitely lose. Chapter 315. However, at the instant Li Onping's right hand struck out with the shockwave, a series of clues flashed rapidly in his mind. From what Li Onping could see, the other party had used his ability a total of 3 times. The first time Shang Zhenhai had used his ability was after Li Onping had charged toward them from the car and struck out a punch, from the rooftop to the interior of the building. The second time was after Li Onping had returned from the alternate world and attacked Shang Zhenhai. The third time was after Li Onping had burrowed into the ground. The difference in the activation speed between the second and third time is too great. The second time, I had only struck out a single punch, and he was able to activate his ability the instant he did so. The third time, I had gone 50 meters underground before he was able to activate his ability. The first and second times he activated his ability were both when I was attacking him. This means that, in that short instant, Li Onping had already thought of many things. At this moment, the white shock wave had just formed and was about to crash towards Shang Zhenhai. At this moment, Li Onping took a step forward and his body directly rushed out, blocking in front of the shockwave. With a rumble, the shockwave crashed onto Li Onping's back, leaving Shang Junhai completely unscathed. The explosive air currents crashed onto the walls of the underground passageway, causing smoke, dust, and mud to fly up, blocking everyone's vision. Yulia's heart clenched. She had already fired the bullet, but she had lost sight of Shang Junhai's figure through her scope. His position had been completely covered by layers of yellow smoke and dust. She had no idea what the result of her final pull of the trigger had been. "You're looking for Shang Junhai?" Just then, Li Onping's voice rang out from behind her head. Yulia's chest tightened. Just as she was about to make a move, she felt a hand grab her neck and lift her whole body up. Yulia was a level 5 aptitude user. Even if she didn't use her abilities, she could crush most aptitude users below level 5 with just her physical body and psychic energy. She was an invincible existence among ordinary people. But now, the person behind her was the man with the strongest body on the planet. Being grabbed by Li Onping, she felt as if her neck would break at any moment. She could no longer breathe. From the moment Shang Junhai appeared to the moment Li Onping launched his attack, he stopped his attack and shifted his target to Yulia. Not even a fraction of a second had passed. When Shang Junhai came back to his senses, he swept away all the smoke and dust in front of him with his powerful psychic force. He could only look up and see Li Onping standing at the entrance of the cave with Yulia pinched like a chick. On the other hand, Yulia's face was flushed red, and her legs were kicking wildly as she struggled incessantly. However, not only was Li Onping holding her by the neck, he was also using the field of nothingness to control her body. Her struggles were futile. How is that possible? Did he see through my ability? To think that he was able to react in less than a second? Shang Junhai's thoughts were in turmoil, but his expression did not change. He looked at Li Onping and said coldly, "Let go of her." Li Onping looked at Shang Junhai under his feet, and the corners of his lips curled up into a cruel smile. With a snap, Yulia's neck tilted, and her legs, which had been struggling incessantly, instantly stopped moving, turning into an involuntary movement. Her neck had been broken by Li Onping. With a bang, her corpse fell down from the entrance of the cave, landing before Shang Junhai. Li Onping said calmly, "Your ability can still be used passively, right?" Shang Junhai's pupils contracted. He had not expected that Li Onping would really be able to see through it. His ability was divided into two parts. The part that could be used actively was known as the unchangeable world, while the part that could be used passively was known as the inviolable boundary. When Shang Junhai's main body reached the 5th energy level, a field that could distort space-time was born in his body. This field could use Shang Junhai as an observer, causing all the material things in the world to become the past to him. Therefore, as long as there was a material attack on Shang Junhai, it would be seen as the past trying to catch up to the future. This was naturally impossible. Therefore, Shang Junhai's ability would be activated naturally, distorting space-time. This was the inviolable boundary. Looking at Shang Junhai's grim countenance, Li Onping opened up his palm. There was a deformed bullet in it. Yulia's target was never me from the very beginning. In fact, under my high-speed movement, she wasn't able to aim at me at all. Li Onping said calmly, "Her target was you. In order to attack you, you were the one who went past the interval between your ability and activated it again." The deformed bullet fell from Li Onping's palm and landed on the ground, letting out a crisp sound. He murmured, "But she didn't activate her ability to shoot you, which gave me the opportunity to grab the bullet so that you couldn't activate your ability. It seems that even with your ability, you can't dodge her sure hit bullet, right?" At this point, there was a sudden rumble from upstairs. Li Onping smiled faintly. That was his psychic avatar killing Banis as well. Just like that, after killing 2 level 5 ability users in a row, plus the previous series of killings, his physical fitness that hadn't improved for a long time finally improved again. His strength increased from 37.8 to 37.9. His speed increased from 38.2 to 38.3. And his stamina increased from 38.7 to 38.8. They all increased by 0.1 respectively. After all, his main body was too powerful right now. Every 0.1 increase would make him a lot stronger, and he also needed more and more powerful souls. Right after the psychic avatar killed Banis, Li Onping pressed one of his palms directly on the ground under his feet. The nihility force field directly covered the ground, completely covering the hole in front of him. Then Li Onping looked at Shang Zhenhai coldly and threw a punch above his head. The white aura was like a terrifying white dragon, rising directly from the basement of the building to the sky. Everywhere it passed, all the cement, stone slabs, furniture, and floors were all torn into countless pieces. A series of explosions and groans came from inside the building. If one looked from the outside, they would see a white dragon rushing directly from the bottom of the building to the roof, and then flying into the distant sky. Then, the entire building started to distort and deform at a speed visible to the naked eye. The walls started to fall apart, and the entire roof shattered into countless stones and fell to the ground. Amidst the earth-shattering explosion, the entire building started to collapse from the first floor, turning into countless fragments and drowning Li Onping's location. And in Shang Zhenhai's vision, he could see countless cement and broken bodies smashing down, but they all stopped at the hole. The hole above his head seemed to be covered by a layer of invisible glass. No matter how many things smashed down, they couldn't enter the hole. At this moment, a hint of understanding flashed through Shang Zhenhai's mind. So that's how it is. He had already confirmed my ability right from the start, and it should be related to time. Entering the underground space wasn't just to further confirm my ability, but also to set up a trap. Thinking of this, Shang Zhenhai took a few steps back, retreating from the vertical passageway to the horizontal underground passageway. As expected, after the entire building collapsed, Li Onping removed the nihility force field at the hole's entrance, allowing the countless remnants of the building to fall into the vertical passageway. He sealed up this underground passageway. Shang Zhenhai looked at the completely blocked exit, and a hint of cold light flashed in his eyes. If this was an ordinary basement, he would be able to charge out directly with his psychic chi. However, he was now in an underground cave that was 50 meters deep, and the only passageway was sealed up by several million tons of reinforced concrete. However, Shang Zhenhai now had more than one ability. He also had the power of the fifth energy level brought about by the spiritual gem. His powerful mental power swept out in all directions. When he saw Barna's corpse, the cold light in Shang Zhenhai's eyes deepened. He spoke calmly to his companions in the distance through his mental connection. Li Onping has escaped. He might head over at any moment. Hurry up. White Short Star, help me create an underground passageway. Chapter 316. Amidst the ruins, Li Onping directly broke through a large piece of wreckage and rushed out from the ground with a crashing sound. His eyes looked at where Shang Zhenhai was, as if he could see Shang Zhenhai's appearance through the layers of the void. This should be able to trap him for the time being, but it can't kill him completely. At the same time, Li Onping heard more and more sounds. There were all kinds of explosions, roars, and the sounds of fighting throughout Tianjing. There's no time to continue fighting with Shang Zhenhai. Priority is to eliminate the other invaders. When Li Onping rushed out of the ruins, the paladins who were originally guarding the building slowly surrounded him. Their previous mission was to guard the building and prevent anyone from getting close to the building to stop Shang Zhenhai, and the other two from trapping Li Onping. When Li Onping collapsed the building with a punch, they scattered and fled, and no one was injured. Now that Li Onping appeared again, they slowly surrounded him. For the other aptitude users in this battle, perhaps Li Onping was a very terrifying monster, a demon that they were unwilling to face for even a second. But for the fanatics of the Knights Templar, they were not afraid of death. There was no fear of death. Even if Li Onping was 10 times or 100 times stronger, he would not be able to make their rigid brains produce fear. Therefore, after confirming that it was Li Onping, Thousands of knights wearing power armor and holding chain words rushed toward Li Onping in the center of the ruins under the command of the commander. Roar! Kill this demon! We are the sword of the Lord. Facing the thousands of Knights Templar, all with distorted faces and bloodshot eyes, rushing toward him like murderous maniacs, Li Onping's eyes flashed with a trace of disgust. He pouted and spat at the crowd. Accompanied by a sonic boom, the spit from Li Onping's mouth hit a knight in the chest. The knight seemed to have been hit by a sledgehammer in the air. Starting from his chest, the entire power armor shattered into pieces, and his whole body was pushed away by this huge force, killing more than 10 knights in a row before he fell to the ground like a broken toy. But seeing this scene, the remaining knights were not afraid at all. Instead, they rushed toward Li Onping even more crazily. The ferocious expression on their faces made it seem like Li Onping was their mortal enemy. With a swoosh, the black psychic avatar appeared directly behind Li Onping. Looking at the fanatics rushing toward him, Li Onping did not bother to pay them any attention. He said directly, "Kill them all." When he finished speaking, he had already soared into the sky and disappeared. The psychic energy incarnation raised its head and looked at the knights with a bloodthirsty gaze. The next moment, before all the knights could react, a black line had passed through hundreds of knights. It was as if a bolt of lightning struck them and connected them, but it was far more terrifying than lightning. It was the impact of the psychic avatar, but because the psychic avatar was too fast, they could only see a black line passing through one knight after another. Every knight that was passed through by the black line exploded in an instant. Like an explosive pack, they were splashed into countless pieces in the explosion. In just a few seconds, thousands of knights had been killed. In the face of an even more overwhelming force, this highest standard armed force of the Code State seemed to have no power to resist. They didn't even know what killed them. Accompanied by various roars and screams, the entire street was dyed red with blood at this moment. The blood seemed to be endless as it flowed in all directions. When Li Onping was temporarily trapped by Shang Jinhai, Jin Guang and Yin Bei were also in a life-and-death battle. Jin Guang's opponent was one of the vice commanders of the Knights Templar, Alexander, who had the title of God's Light. He was also one of the level 5 ability users in the Code State. Alexander's ability was very simple. He could emit light from any part of his body. When every inch of his skin emitted light at the same time, the intensity of the light was similar to a stage spotlight. But when he reduced the area where he emitted light bit by bit, the light began to focus and the intensity of the light began to increase. When the light began to emit from his fingertips, it was like a high-temperature laser that was enough to burn gold and boil iron. His ability looked very simple, but it was because of its simplicity that it was powerful. Whether it was the unparalleled speed of light or the flexibility of being able to emit light from any part of his body, it put Jin Guang in an absolute predicament. Jin Guang, who had completed his transformation, was burning with golden flames all over his body. He was attacking Alexander at a high speed that was difficult to be seen with the naked eye. However, although his speed was far superior to his opponent, it was not faster than the speed of light. Although Jin Guang could rely on his faster body speed and reaction speed to avoid some attacks in advance, it was difficult for him to dodge most of the attacks. As he rushed toward Alexander, he raised his hand and threw a psychic bullet the size of a car at his opponent. However, just as the psychic bullet flew a few meters away, it was hit by 3 or 4 consecutive beams of light. It exploded in midair and disappeared. Following that, more than a dozen beams of light shot toward Jin Guang, who was moving at high speed. Although he tried his best to dodge some of them, most of them still hit his body. Relying on his endless psychic energy, Jin Guang was able to block these beams of light, but his skin was still charred black. Facing Jin Guang's attacks, Alexander did not move at all. He only raised his finger and made Jin Guang run for his life. Weak. Too weak. Is this the power that gives you heretics the courage to act so recklessly? You're really a frog at the bottom of a well. Following Alexander's last sentence, The frequency of the beams of light shot out from his body instantly increased. Jing Guang's shoulder was suddenly penetrated by a high-energy beam of light. He screamed and crashed into a house. On the other side, Yin Bei's situation seemed to be even worse. In contrast to Jing Guang, he was the one who stood still. He saw Walford walking calmly beside him. Every time he attacked, he would leave a wound on Yin Bei's body. On the other hand, every time Yin Bei attacked with a collapsing space, Walford would dodge and advance. In just 10 minutes after Li Anping left, the ground under Yin Bei's feet had turned into a pool of blood. His face was pale, and his head was dizzy. He felt as if he would collapse at any time. Seeing his weak appearance, Walford laughed. "You still don't want to surrender? Your ability has great potential. Why don't you join the Knights Templar? If you can reach the 5th energy level, you definitely have the ability to become a vice captain." "Shut up." Yin Bei raised his hand and directly created 2 collapsing spaces on Walford's left and right. However, Walford did not move at all. If he had dodged just now, he would have directly hit the collapsing force field. However, when he saw Yin Bei's attack hand gesture, he did not move at all, as if he had predicted it in advance. TSK, TSK, TSK. How stubborn. Are all of you Xia Dragonfinch people so stupid? Walford said casually, "That Tang Weihan is also like this. He won't let go even if he dies." "What did you say?" A cold light flashed in Yin Bei's eyes. It was as if he had regained consciousness before his death. He stared at Walford without letting go. "Oh, he's also one of you Xia Dragonfinch people, but he infiltrated our Knights Templar. You know him?" Walford chuckled. "His screams before he died left me with an endless aftertaste." Yin Bei roared. Although he knew that Walford was trying to provoke him, he still could not help but be angry. The remaining psychic force burned fiercely, and the collapsing space began to form with him as the center. Within 100 meters, everything was stirred up by this terrifying gravitational force. Walford's expression changed. He did not expect Yin Bei to be so ruthless as to want to die together with him. He also did not expect Yin Bei's collapsing ability to cover such a large area. What he did not know was that this was the effect of Yin Bei's collapsing ability after using his body as the center. Everything within 100 meters would turn into dust, including Yin Bei himself. Just as the collapsing force field was about to be fully activated, a palm pressed on Yin Bei's shoulder. "All right, put away." Yin Bei paused and slowly turned his head to look behind him. "Your Majesty." Li Anping patted him on the shoulder and said calmly, "You did well. Leave the rest to me." Yin Bei's face relaxed. The next moment, his eyes closed and he fainted. The huge collapsing force field disappeared without a trace in the next moment. Li Anping carried the unconscious Yin Bei and placed him on the ground. He then took out the hemostatic spray from Yin Bei's battle uniform and started to give him some simple treatment. Walford backed off slowly while observing Li Anping carefully. "It's okay. Even if he attacks me, I'll be able to see it in advance." Although he thought this, Walford could not help but back off faster and faster, getting closer to Alexander. This continued until Li Anping stood up and set his gaze on him. At this moment, it was as if the Grim Reaper's scythe was placed on his neck. Walford's body started to tremble, and his eyes kept on revealing despair. Yes, he had seen it. However, it was because he had seen it that he felt even more despair. He would not be able to fend off even a single attack from Yin Bei. Death was about to descend upon him in the next second. The despairing thing was that he could see it, but was unable to stop it. Li Anping's gaze was like an iceberg on the surface of the North Pole. He said without any emotions, "I'm very busy now, so I won't be listening to your last words. Please go and die." When these words reached Walford's ears, Li Anping had already taken a step forward and appeared behind Walford. Li Anping held Walford's head in his hand and squeezed it lightly. With a crisp sound, Walford's head exploded like a watermelon. Walford's headless corpse swayed and then collapsed in the next second. Chapter 317. Alexander looked at where Jing Guang was hiding and smiled in disdain. A futile struggle. His psychic energy swept through the residential area, and then he pointed his finger at where Jin Guang was. "Goodbye, little frog." At the next moment, a laser beam shot out from his fingertip and pierced through the walls of the residential area, piercing through Jin Guang's chest and killing him completely, just like how he had killed countless lambs in the past. However, just as he was about to use his ability, he felt a slight pain in his index finger. The beam of light that he expected did not appear at all. He subconsciously lowered his head and looked at his index finger. He saw that the first knuckle of his index finger had been completely broken and was slowly falling to the ground under the influence of gravity. It was only then that he could slowly see Li Onping's figure appearing before him. Li Onping was looking at him coldly, like he was looking at a pig that was about to be slaughtered. This was the gaze that Alexander hated the most. In this world, he was the only one who could look at others like this. Two beams of light that were only millimeters long shot out from Alexander's eyes and instantly hit Li Onping's forehead. Wherever the light passed by, there was a puff of green smoke in the air. Alexander was confident that no one with abilities would be able to block this beam of light with their physical body. "I heard that he has the ability to regenerate rapidly. In that case, I'll just melt his entire brain." However, something that shocked Alexander happened. No matter how much he increased the output of the beams from his eyes, Fang Xingjian's body remained unscathed. It was as if what he had shot out was not a high-energy beam, but a torchlight. He subconsciously took a step back and looked at Li Onping as if he was looking at a ghost. "You." However, before he could finish his words, Li Onping had already slapped his head. Amidst a series of explosive sounds, Alexander's entire head was slapped into his chest by a tremendous force. His entire chest swelled up, and several of his ribs even pierced through. In just a single exchange, he was already deader than dead. After killing Alexander with a single slap, Li Onping turned to look at Jin Guang and said, "Take care of Yin Bei, then go and provide support to the base." Jin Guang held his shoulder and stood up. He nodded at Li Onping and ran towards Yin Bei. On the other side of the street, applause rang out. The Nether King looked at Li Onping with hatred. He applauded and praised. "You are indeed worthy of being the person who defeated me. Compared to before, you are more than 10 times stronger." Li Onping looked at the Netherworld King in confusion. "Have you been cloned? Don't compare me to those clones." The Pluto King snorted. "This time, I crawled out from hell to take revenge on you. Li Onping, you should have heard the cries of the city. Not only you, but your subordinates, your friends, and everyone related to you will die. We will completely destroy you and wipe out all traces of you in this world." Seeing how hysterical the Pluto King was, Li Onping did not say anything. He directly charged toward the Pluto King and punched him in the chest. However, this punch did not have any other effect other than creating a gust of wind where the Pluto King was standing and blowing away over 10 cars. Li Onping's fist seemed to have hit another world and directly entered the Pluto King's body. It was not just Li Onping's fist. Even his entire body seemed to have charged into a portal and crashed into the Pluto King's body. Li Onping felt his vision blur, and then he appeared in another world. The gray sky, the blood-red moon, and the barren land under his feet. The appearance of the underworld appeared in front of Li Onping again. Is this really the Pluto King's underworld? Li Onping thought. His punch just now was both a test and an attack. If the other party was an imposter, Fang Xingjian would kill him with a single punch. However, if the other party was really the Pluto King, then external attacks would be ineffective. Fang Xingjian would have to enter the underworld and kill the Pluto King's actual body. Recalling what the Pluto King had said earlier, Li Onping thought of a rumor. Legend has it that Paladin, the leader of the Knights Templar, has the ability to be considered the strongest in the Netherworld Kingdom. In terms of external abilities, he has the ability to revive the dead. Is this true? As this thought flashed through his mind, even Li Onping could not help but feel some ripples in his mind. The ability to revive the dead was indeed very tempting. However, he knew that now was not the time to think about this. He looked toward the blood moon in the sky and exerted some force in his legs, shooting up into the sky like a rocket. The spot where he had been standing earlier seemed to have been hit by an earthquake. The ground within several hundred meters of him exploded and sank at the same time, turning into a huge crater. With the push from this tremendous reaction force, Li Onping flew toward the blood moon in the sky at an astonishing speed. Looking at the blood moon that was right in front of him, Li Onping let out a low bellow. His right fist smashed out toward the blood moon with a force that was as great as the mountains and seas. Before the fist got close, a series of terrifying hissing sounds rang out in the sky. The air around Li Onping was instantly pushed away and sucked dry. The first thing that hit the blood moon was the shock wave that was formed from the white air currents pushed by the fist. The terrifying air currents collided against the blood moon, and the surface of the blood moon seemed as if it had been struck by a meteor. The rock layers on the surface collapsed abruptly, and countless rocks and fragments shot out. The entire blood moon trembled intensely as if it was going to shatter into pieces at the next moment. This was merely the repercussions of the attack. When Li Onping's fist really hit the surface of the blood moon, a crisp bang rang out in the entire space. It was as if something had been torn apart. In the next moment, with Li Onping's fist as the center, many cracks spread out wildly in all directions like dancing silver snakes. Then, a series of explosions rang out in the sky. The blood moon was shattered into countless fragments by this punch, and they shot out in all directions. It felt as if a star had exploded. As the blood moon disappeared, the entire sky seemed to darken. Previously, Li Onping had used a total of 3 punches to shatter the Abyss Lord's blood moon. However, this time around, he had not even used his full power. A simple punch had shattered the entire blood moon. This showed how much his abilities had increased. However, as the blood moon was shattered with a single punch, Li Onping frowned. It was because when the fragments of the blood moon dissipated, another blood-colored moon appeared in its original position. It was as if what Li Onping had shattered earlier was just an illusion. The Abyss Lord's laughter rang out from within the blood moon. It was as if he was laughing at Li Onping for overestimating his abilities. "Idiot, do you think that I'll lose to you twice in the same place? I, who crawled out from hell, am a true immortal. As long as the duration of the Netherworld Kingdom is not up, no attacks will be able to kill me, and you'll be trapped here forever, watching as your subordinates die one by one. In the end, when I die once again, the entire Netherworld will be annihilated, and you, Li Onping, will die together with the Netherworld. You'll perish together with me." Seeing Li Onping's frown, the Abyss Lord smiled excitedly. How is it, this feeling of waiting for death quietly? Li Onping ignored him. He was communicating with the Psyche Chi clone in the outside world, hoping to use it to find the caster. It was the great commander of the Temple Knights, Paladin. However, just then, a man with platinum hair and wearing white long robes appeared on the blood moon. There was no hint of emotion in his gaze. It was as cold as a robot's. No, it was not a robot. It was as if he was the high and mighty king of gods. No matter what it was, there was no difference in his eyes. It was not coldness and mercilessness, but pure equality. "Hello, Li Onping." The man looked at Li Onping and said calmly, "My name is Paladin, the commander of the Temple Knights." At the instant the other party said his name, Li Onping's mind quickly reacted. The Netherworld Kingdom can guarantee that the Abyss Lord won't die. And in the Netherworld, no matter how many times Paladin is killed, he won't truly die. The two of them form a cycle of death. Li Onping let out a breath. Troublesome. Chapter 3:18. Seeing that Li Onping was ignoring him, Paladin did not mind. He continued, "Li Onping, if you are willing to join the Knights Templar and become a loyal servant of the Lord, I can let you go now." When Paladin said this, he was still expressionless and cold, as if there was nothing else in the world that could attract his attention other than the Lord. Hearing Paladin's words, Li Onping sneered. "Oh, you want me to join the Saint Truth? I just killed all your Knights Templar. Aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word after leaving? It doesn't matter. If they die for the Lord, they will ascend to the 72 layers of heaven and enjoy supreme glory. If you're willing to join us, you will naturally have to accept our countermeasure and temporarily let us control your body, Paladin said calmly. As long as you are willing to join the Knights Templar and spread the glory of the Lord, you will be able to atone for your previous mistakes. Atone? Leon Ping snorted coldly. Okay, I have no problem joining the Saint Truth, but I must lead the entire Saint Truth. Arrogant. This time, Paladin was no longer expressionless. Instead, a hint of anger flashed in his eyes, and his tone was somewhat cold. Leon Ping, you probably don't understand, do you? My kingdom of the Netherworld can resurrect the dead for 3 days. Within these 3 days, the resurrected person can never be killed again. Therefore, the Netherworld King now has an immortal body, and I, who is in the underworld, am protected by the underworld and also have an immortal body. No matter how many times you kill us, you will never be able to leave the underworld. After 1 day, my kingdom of the Netherworld will end and the underworld will disappear. You, who can't return to the real world, will also disappear with him. Leon Ping said, So, you don't plan to leave alive? Paladin closed his eyes and said with a compassionate temperament, For the glory of the Lord, for the safety of the whole world, I will not hesitate to sacrifice the entire Knights Templar. Leon Ping said disdainfully, Ridiculous. Do you think this world will be better without me? I don't know. Paladin shook his head. But you're too aggressive and your strength is increasing too quickly. If we don't stop you, there will be a battle between you and the Western land sooner or later. When that time comes, the people will be plunged into misery and suffering, and it will be the end of the world. That won't happen, because once I make a move, I won't give the Western land any chance to retaliate. Leon Ping said confidently, When that time comes, the world will the world. I will lead all the humans into the utopia. There will be no crime, no hunger, no poverty, and no hatred in the whole society. The entire human society will enter the world. This is my will, and it will also be the will of the entire world. No one can stop me. Looking at Leon Ping's resolute gaze, Paladin sighed and said, Since you have such ambitions, I can't let you go out. We'll only bring it to the you have the not have you. Completely to Paladin to his is not die. He to die, go goes to the end. Leon Ping's heart skipped a beat, and he finally made contact with his spirit chi clone. It seemed that although this place no longer belonged to the real world, it was not like when he was banished, where he was unable to make contact with his spirit chi clone due to the great distance. After spending some time, Feng Xingjian was still able to sense the spirit chi clone's existence. Right now, the spirit chi clone was standing on the ruins of the building. Thousands of knights' corpses lay under his feet. As he had lost contact with Leon Ping, the spirit chi clone from before had lowered his head and remained motionless. Now that the two of them were connected once again, the spirit chi clone lifted his head. A shadow flashed before Leon Ping, and the spirit chi clone broke through the many obstructions and arrived in the underworld. Seeing this thing that had suddenly appeared before Leon Ping, both Paladin and the Abyss Lord became curious. This was an ability that Leon Ping's information had not shown before. However, they were merely curious and did not think that Leon Ping had the ability to kill them or break through the underworld. On the other hand, Leon Ping no longer paid attention to Blood Moon and Paladin. It was true that he was unable to kill Paladin and the Abyss Lord due to the interaction of their abilities. However, this did not mean that he had given up. Under Leon Ping's control, the entire spirit chi clone started to gradually change shape and shrink, drifting toward Leon Ping's palm. This was a move that I thought of when I was thinking of how to kill Shang Jinhai. But its prowess and side effects are too great. It's obviously not suitable to use it directly in Tianjing. But if it's in the underworld, it won't be a problem. Under the Abyss Lords and Paladins' puzzled gazes, the spirit chi clone quickly gathered into a black sphere and curled up on Leon Ping's palm. At the beginning, the black sphere in Lianping's palm was about the size of a basketball. The Abyss Lord and Paladin could even see waves of black Nianqi seething within it. However, the Spirit Chi clone started to shrink its body on its own, causing the entire black sphere to become smaller and smaller. From the size of a basketball, it became the size of a tennis ball, then the size of a ping pong ball. Then, the Spirit Chi clone started to compress itself using the void force field. Under the extremely high pressure, it shrank again from a diameter of 1 meter to a diameter of 1 millimeter, then 1 micron, and then 1 nanometer. In the end, the Abyss Lord and Paladin were no longer able to see the existence of the black sphere. Even Lianping himself was unable to see the black sphere. Its size was already difficult to discern with the naked eye. Lianping could only rely on the connection between himself and the Spirit Chi clone to sense its location. It was also at this moment that Paladin's hair stood on end. Even though he knew that he had an immortal body, he still felt an unprecedented sense of danger from Lianping's right palm. What on earth is he trying to do? At the same time, the surrounding air started to flow in the direction of the black sphere in Lianping's palm. It was like a gate to the alternate world, continuously swallowing and spitting out the surrounding air. Then, Lianping raised both his hands and raised the black sphere high above his head. Then, he turned his void force field into a suction force. Lianping's void force field continued to generate a suction force toward the center of his hands, which was the direction of the black sphere. Meanwhile, the Spirit Chi clone used the void force field that enveloped itself to form an inward pressure. This time, more air rushed toward the black sphere. It was like a singularity that could never be filled, continuously absorbing everything in the air. Paladin's heart tightened as he watched the surrounding air rush toward Lianping. A ridiculous thought appeared in his mind. Just as he was laughing at his ridiculous thought, he saw Lianping slowly descending toward the underworld's ground. Right now, Lianping's hands are like the eye of an invisible typhoon. As he got closer and closer to the ground below him seemed to start to become frustrated. The sand on the ground started to fly toward the black sphere in the sky uncontrollably. As Lianping gradually descended toward the ground, this situation became increasingly serious. In the beginning, it was just sand. Then it was small pebbles and rocks. Then it was large patches of soil and rock layers. They were sucked into the black sphere directly. Under the powerful pressure, they turned into a spot that was hard to see with the naked eye. It was as if they were being swallowed up. This is a black hole? How is this possible? An unbelievable thought appeared in Paladin's mind, but he immediately rejected it. Impossible. How can Lianping create a black hole with his own power? The Abyss Lord, who was in the Blood Moon, also reacted. He calmly analyzed, "It does look like a black hole, but it's just a simulated black hole. Lianping should have gotten inspiration from black holes. He should be able to create a satellite, but so what?" Just as the two of them were conversing, the suction force from the black sphere seemed to be getting stronger as more and more things were being swallowed up. In the blink of an eye, the ground under Lianping's feet turned into a large hole with a diameter of several hundred meters and a depth of several tens of meters. The missing parts had all been swallowed up by the black sphere. However, even after sucking in so many things, the black sphere size was still hard to see with the naked eye. It was just that the suction force from it was increasing at a speed that was hard for ordinary people to detect. As more and more soil and rocks were being sucked away, the hole under Lianping's feet became increasingly bigger. Chapter 319. Everything in the world had mass. The greater the mass of an object, the stronger its mass field would be, and the stronger the distortion of space-time would be. Space-time was like the surface of the sea that was being squeezed by a heavy object. It would be distorted by the mass of an object. As the degree of distortion of space-time changed, the so-called universal gravitational force would be created. Therefore, in a gravitational field, the properties of space-time were determined by the object's mass distribution. Simply put, the denser the matter, the more distorted space-time would be. The so-called space-time curvature would also be greater, and the gravitational force produced by the distortion of space-time would also be greater. In the universe, there were countless examples of this. The most common example was that when light passed by some massive celestial bodies, its route would become distorted. This was because it would advance along the space-time curvature caused by the massive celestial bodies distorting space-time. Black holes were the ultimate creation in the universe when the space-time curvature had reached a certain degree. They had a huge mass, but their size was infinitely small. Even light would not be able to escape from the distorted space-time. The black sphere in Lianping's hand was naturally unable to reach the level of a black hole. As a simulated black hole, its powers were probably not even 1/billionth of a real black hole. However, to the current underworld, it was already powerful enough. This was the first time he was using pure power to distort space-time. After the originally indiscernible black sphere engulfed countless rocks, soil, and plants, it became an existence that was about the size of a fingernail. A terrifying suction force kept on coming from within it, and its power to engulf the surrounding matter became increasingly strong. Large pieces of soil kept on rising from the ground under Lianping's feet and were then sucked into the black sphere. The rate at which the ground was disappearing became increasingly faster. Paladin looked at the gradually disappearing ground in disbelief. His calm face was now filled with astonishment. Does he want to destroy the entire underworld? What's the point of that? The Netherworld King laughed, but there was no hint of happiness in his voice. Do you still not understand? He's simulating a black hole. He wants to use great power to forcefully create a celestial body with high density and mass. The Netherworld King's voice seemed to tremble. The space in the underworld naturally can't be as sturdy as the space in the real world. If the quality and density of the things he creates are high enough. Before he finished speaking, the suction force of the simulated black hole in Lianping's hand increased once again. The ground within a radius of tens of kilometers began to tremble. Countless rocks and soil rose into the air and flew toward the simulated black hole. At this time, after absorbing so much matter, the simulated black hole had grown to the size of a finger. Lianping felt the suction force from the material above his head getting stronger and stronger. With a push, the simulated black hole flew up into the sky with the help of his psychic avatar. As he rose into the air, the area under his feet that was affected grew larger and larger. In just a few minutes, even the soil and rocks hundreds of kilometers away began to float up. Looking at the sphere that was slowly moving toward him, Paladin bellowed, "Hurry up and think of something. According to what you said, if this thing continues to strengthen, it will directly break the spatial passageway between the underworld and the real world." The Nether King racked his brains, but just like Paladin, he couldn't think of anything. The limits of Lianping's power had already reached an unimaginable level. Right now, he was relying on naked violence to forcibly open up a path to the real world. Other than hoping that Lianping's power would be depleted and he wouldn't be able to reach this step, they had no other ideas. When over 500 square kilometers of land disappeared, only countless black matter could be seen appearing where the land had originally been. This was the scene at the borders of the underworld. The underworld's land was only a few kilometers deep. Once the soil and rocks on it were peeled off, this scene would be seen. Right now, the simulated black hole in the sky looked like a perfectly round rock. It was about 1/5 the size of the blood moon. However, the suction force coming from its body was something that the blood moon couldn't compare to. As its mass grew increasingly larger and its position got closer to the blood moon, Paladin felt waves of powerful suction force that seemed to want to pull him over. If it wasn't for the fact that he had used all of his powers and his feet had even sunk deeply into the surface of the blood moon, he might have been pulled toward the simulated black hole at any moment. Lianping, looking at the increasingly powerful simulated black hole that was getting closer and closer, Paladin opened his mouth as if wanting to say something. However, after uttering the words Lianping, no matter how hard he tried to speak, he was unable to say another word. The Nether King sighed inwardly. He knew that although the simulated black hole before him couldn't engulf light, it had reached a stage where it could engulf sound. Paladin, who was on the blood moon, trembled slightly, and his entire body was pulled out of the blood moon by a tremendous force. He flew rapidly toward the simulated black hole in midair. At the next moment, his entire body was like a packet of ketchup. It was as if someone had pressed his body onto the simulated black hole, exploding into a pool of red with a puff sound. Then, his corpse lay on the surface of the simulated black hole. In just an instant, under the tremendous pressure, it turned into powder that was hard to distinguish with the naked eye. Then, it was covered up by the mud and rocks that rushed over from behind. However, before all of this happened, Liamping had already grabbed him and brought him to the back of the simulated black hole. As the simulated black hole became even more powerful and got closer, the rock layers on the blood moon were completely peeled off. If one were to look at it from below, they would discover that the entire blood moon seemed to be deforming, becoming slightly flattened. In fact, its body shape didn't change, but the space-time it was in started to distort. This was also because the underworld was an artificial space and was far from being as sturdy as the space in the real world. At the next moment, the space seemed to start to shatter. The simulated black hole that had become the size of a house collided with the blood moon. Accompanied by endless shattering sounds, the space near the blood moon seemed to be filled with waves of ripples. A beam of light shot out from the center of the blood moon. Then, more and more light shot out, and a passageway that was the size of a person appeared in the center of the blood moon. From it, one could see the scenery of Tianjing. With the appearance of this passageway, the entire underworld was like a bungalow that had been violently demolished. It started to tremble intensely, and many black cracks started to appear in the surrounding sky. The simulated black hole was about to destroy the entire underworld space. At the same time, a black shadow cut across the atmosphere like lightning. Liamping had already grabbed Paladin and dashed toward the passageway. In Tianjing, the underworld lord let out a tragic cry. Liamping had already dashed out from his chest with Paladin in his hand. After returning to the real world, Liamping immediately summoned his psychic chi incarnation back. He did not wish for his psychic chi incarnation to perish together with the entire underworld. As for Paladin, he had been pulled out by Liamping. The series of huge impact had already knocked him out. The underworld lord knelt onto the ground. Faint cracks started to appear on his body, and black gas started to seep out from the cracks. At this moment, even though Liamping had extracted his psychic chi incarnation, the destruction of the underworld was irreversible. The underworld lord was like a porcelain doll that had been smashed onto the ground. A large area of cracks appeared on his body. After he stopped screaming, he lifted his head and looked at Liamping in disbelief. There was still a black crack on his face that split his head into two. The underworld has disappeared. The underworld lord laughed bitterly. It was unknown if he was laughing at himself or at Liamping. Without the underworld, I've lost my abilities. However, due to the Netherworld Kingdom, I'm still alive for the time being. Liamping. The underworld lord looked at Liamping. From now on, I'll be a pure spectator. Let me see if you'll be the one to defeat the entire world, or if the Heavenly Queen and the others will be the one to wipe you out. With your powers, how far can you go? Liamping ignored the underworld lord. His ears twitched slightly, and various information was transmitted into his mind. Then, the black psychic chi incarnation moved slightly and turned into a black line, darting out toward the airport. Liamping shook Paladin in his hand. Seeing that Paladin had woken up, he imitated Paladin's words and said with a mocking expression, "Paladin, right? My name is Liamping, the master of the Xia Dragonfinch, the king of the Eastern Land. If you're willing to be my subordinate, I can let you live." Chapter 320. Hearing Liamping's words, Paladin did not say anything. He merely closed his eyes appearing as if he was resigned to his fate. Lianping understood that religious fanatics like Paladin, who saw saving the world as their mission, would not be so stubborn that they could be persuaded with just a few words. Even if Paladin were to be tortured and subjected to all sorts of brainwashing methods, they might not be able to change his mind. Most importantly, Paladin still had hope in his heart, and that was the League of Stars and the Imaginary Number Agency. This time around, the Order of Universal Truth had sent out all of the Knights Templar to besiege Tianjing. The combination of Paladin and the Abyss Lord was their killer move. Paladin was very certain that the League of Stars and the Imaginary Number Agency, who had come together, would definitely have a plan on how to eliminate Lianping. In fact, he was right. Lianping, who was standing before him, had also realized this. Leaders like Paladin, who had come to besiege Tianjing, would definitely have made arrangements to deal with him. They would not be so easy to get rid of. It was just like how Shang Zhenhai and the other two had stalled for time, and how Paladin had created a cycle of death. Therefore, he changed his previous arrangement slightly and still prioritized the level of danger. Lianping planned to get rid of the weaker opponents in Tianjing City first. He pinched Paladin's neck gently, and the latter fainted. When the Abyss Lord saw Lianping casually tossing the unconscious Paladin onto the ground, he could not help but say, "Are you planning to leave him here, just like that? Aren't you afraid that he'll be saved by others?" "I'll kill whoever saves me," Lianping said coldly. With a light leap, he flew in the direction of the Imperial Palace. In the forest on the outskirts of Tianjing, in the direction of the airport, every now and then, a series of crashing sounds would ring out from the forest, startling a flock of birds. Suddenly, a huge iceberg appeared out of nowhere, and several hundred bloodbats were frozen in the iceberg. Below the iceberg, Bai Xing had dodged and avoided Samuel's sudden attack. Then, sparks flew everywhere. The two of them fought with speed. The sabers and swords in their hands were like lightning in the sky. In an instant, they slashed across the space within a radius of 100 meters, tearing countless trees into shreds and filling the sky with debris. With a roar, Kron was like a huge battleship, rushing toward the two with terrifying kinetic energy. Every step he took caused the earth to tremble. Wherever he passed, whether it was trees or stones, they were all knocked into the sky. Bai Xing's left hand was still broken. The continuous high-intensity battles had left him no time to treat it. At this moment, seeing Kron rush over, he already understood that the other side was not afraid of being injured by the reaction force. He used his full strength without any scruples. That kind of pure brute force was not something he could face head-on. He wanted to dodge, but Samuel used teleportation to stick to him. He didn't have a chance to dodge. In the blink of an eye, Kron was already in front of him. Bai Xinghe once again blocked Samuel with his sword. The cold air was transmitted to Samuel through the two swords, causing his body to freeze. He also took the time to raise his broken left hand and gently pressed his palm against Kron's body. A stream of pure brute force was transmitted from Bai Xinghe's arm to his feet. In a huge explosion, the earth was shaking. Bai Xinghe, who had absorbed most of the force, grunted and was blown away by the remaining force. Blood began to flow out from his ears. His arm, that was already twisted, was even more seriously injured. Not only was his elbow completely disjointed, there was even a small segment of broken white bone that directly broke through the skin, piercing out. Kron, who suffered the same reaction force, didn't seem to be in a good condition either. Most of his arm was completely shattered, but as black gas gushed out of his body and filled the surrounding soil, his body quickly recovered. Seeing Bai Xinghe's sorry state, Kron could not help but laugh out loud. "You're still waiting for Lianping? He can't save you anymore. I'm afraid he can't even protect himself now." White smoke suddenly rose from the iceberg. Hundreds of flaming blood bats broke out of the ice and reunited in the air, turning into the human form of the blood demon. "You scum. If it weren't for the lack of food around." Viciousness appeared in the blood demon's eyes. In the series of battles just now, he was the one who had suffered the most injuries, but he had barely achieved anything. Compared to Samuel and Kron, He was too weak. However, it was not because he was weak, but because his abilities were limited. This made him feel both embarrassed and angry. He looked at Bai Xinghe with even more hostility. Samuel weighed the item in his hand and asked curiously, "Is this item made based on the sword in New Dongyang?" Samuel's abilities had been absorbed by the new king's sword of Tatsuka in Dongyang. When Bai Xinghe saw the legacy in Samuel's hand, his expression changed. He hurriedly touched his back, but there was nothing. During Samuel's consecutive teleportation attacks, he had actually taken the legacy from Bai Xinghe's back. Bai Xinghe stared at Samuel coldly and demanded, one word after another, "Give me back my sword." Samuel smiled. "So it's true? Then he has that ability too?" He looked at Bai Xinghe and then at the long sword in his hand. His eyes were deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. Beside him, the blood demon asked impatiently, "What kind of riddles are you playing? Is there anything special about this sword?" Samuel smiled mysteriously and did not say anything. However, he tightened his grip on the long sword in his hand. Bai Xinghe narrowed his eyes. There seemed to be a hint of coldness in his eyes. "The injuries on my left hand are too severe. If this continues, I won't even be able to get the sword back, let alone leave." Bai Xinghe had been fighting with the three resurrected people for more than 10 minutes. During this time, he had killed them at least 10 times. Even Samuel, who could teleport, had been frozen to death by him once. However, with the undying body granted by the kingdom of Hades, Samuel was able to injure Bai Xinghe at the cost of his own life. Not only was he able to stall Bai Xinghe, but his physical strength and mental energy were also being depleted. His left hand, in particular, had severely affected his combat ability. Thinking about this, he looked at his left hand, which was barely connected to his skin. Suddenly, he raised the original sword of Tatsuka in his right hand. "I'll have to cut off my left hand first. Then, I'll take the legacy back and find His Majesty." Kron punched his two fists together, making a thunderous sound. Then, he roared, "Have you rested enough? Let's continue. I want to return to you what you gave me last time, one by one." Bai Xinghe let out a breath. He turned the blade in his right hand and slashed at his left elbow. However, just as the sword of Tatsuka was about to cut off his entire right arm, the blade stopped. The blade had already sunk half an inch into his flesh. Blood flowed out from the blade. Samuel chuckled. "What's wrong? You can't cut it anymore? Then let me help you." As he spoke, he had already sheathed his dagger. Holding the legacy with both hands, he pointed it in Bai Xinghe's direction. However, Bai Xinghe, who had been wearing a grave expression earlier, suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the three of them calmly, especially Samuel. He said, "I advise the three of you to throw down your swords and run." He looked at the sky behind the three of them. A black line was silently flying toward them. It was so fast that it seemed to be able to cut the sky in half. Hearing Bai Xinghe's words, Samuel looked at him as if he was looking an idiot. "Are you crazy? We have undying bodies now. Even if Li Anping comes, we won't be afraid, let alone you." Kron also chuckled. "You have no idea how powerful we are now. It's impossible for us to be defeated." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Blood flames burned on the blood demon's body once again. "Kill him quickly and return to Tianjing. I can't wait to find Li Anping. I'm going to peel off his skin bit by bit." Bai Xinghe shook his head. He looked at the three of them as if he was looking at dead people and said softly, "Goodbye." Before the three of them could react, a black bolt of lightning descended from the sky. It smashed towards Samuel with the force of a thunderbolt. Two black feet stepped on Samuel's head, and the huge force crushed his head in an instant. His eyeballs flew hundreds of meters away. Then, the pair of feet stepped on Samuel's chest and abdomen, turning his body into a pile of meat paste. Finally, Samuel's body was smashed into the ground. Within a range of several hundred kilometers, the entire land was torn apart by this attack. With the spot that was hit as the center, the soil seethed out in all directions like waves. Wherever it passed by, countless trees were uprooted. Smoke and dust soared into the sky, bringing along with it countless soil, grass, and rocks. Then, under the effect of gravity, they slowly fell to the ground. When the smoke and dust that covered everything gradually dissipated, it could be seen that the place where Samuel had been standing had become a huge pit. Samuel had turned into a pile of char meat paste. He kept on trembling and struggling, as if he wanted to reassemble and recover. Right now, the psychic energy clone was stepping on this corpse. It was because he had descended from the sky and stomped Samuel's head and body into meat paste. The psychic energy incarnation held the sword of legacy in his hand, and black psychic energy surged all over his body. He looked at Samuel, who was struggling under his feet and slowly growing an eye, and stepped on it. With a squelch, the psychic energy incarnation crushed the eyeball. Then, he raised his head and looked at the blood demon and Kron. Chapter 321. With just one gaze, both Kron and the blood demon felt a sense of suffocation. What on earth am I afraid of? I have an immortal body now, with the power I can use without any reservations, even if it's Li Onping. At the thought of this, Kron felt a sense of humiliation for his instinctive fear earlier. He let out a furious bellow and charged toward Li Onping. The power brought about by the Earth's rotation continued to flow into Kron's body. With the limits of what this body could withstand, he would not hesitate even if his entire body were to explode in the next moment. The brute force brought about by this was also extremely ferocious. Wherever Kron's fist passed by, a vacuum corridor would be formed. The strong gales that blew were even able to blow down the surrounding large trees. With his current power, he would probably be able to blow away an entire street with just a wave of his hand. Sensing the power contained in his right fist that could tear apart the sky, Kron had never felt that he could be so powerful. This sense of satisfaction that his entire body was brimming with power gave him great confidence as he punched out toward Li Onping's chest. Faced with Kron's punch, Li Onping also extended his right fist. He did not make any preparations, nor did he accumulate any power. He did not even feel like he was exerting any force. He simply met Kron's fist with his right fist, and his right fist lightly collided with Kron's fist. The scene of a comet colliding with the Earth did not appear. Kron was like a piece of tofu colliding with a steel plate. After the two fists collided, he did not feel any pain at all. His entire body turned into a pile of mush under the impact of the two tremendous forces, shooting out explosively in all directions. Screams rang out. When the blood demon saw that Kron had been crushed by Li Onping's punch so easily, a horrified expression flashed across his face. He immediately forgot all the words he had just said. He had already turned into several hundred blood-colored bats, flying out in all directions. Faced with the fleeing blood demon, Li Onping suddenly opened his mouth and took a deep breath. As Li Onping took this deep breath, the surrounding air currents were sucked into his mouth at a rate visible to the naked eye. It was as if a hurricane had swept through the entire forest. Li Onping's mouth was like a bottomless black hole, turning all the surrounding air into strong gales and sucking them into his lungs. Bai Xinghe, who was standing at the side, even found it difficult to breathe. His body felt as if it was going to be pulled up. He immediately lowered his body into a horse stance, his feet digging into the ground. Even the trees within a 100-meter radius were directly uprooted by this breath and flew into the sky. However, before they could fly a few meters, they were already torn into pieces by the explosive air currents and filled the sky. In the span of a breath, the mountains and rivers changed colors. Li Onping's breath was earth-shattering. As he inhaled, the blood-colored bats, which had flown more than 100 meters away, found it difficult to move forward. It was as if they had to exhaust all their strength for every meter they flew. They were like small boats in a storm, unable to control their own life and death. After flying for a few meters, all the blood-colored bats began to retreat. They followed the direction of the strong wind and shot toward Li Onping. In the blink of an eye, several hundred blood-colored bats were all sucked into Li Onping's mouth and swallowed. When Li Onping stopped inhaling, The entire forest looked as if it had been swept by a strong wind. There was not a single intact tree in sight. A blood-colored bat emerged from Li Onping's mouth, as if it was struggling to crawl out. However, Li Onping closed his mouth, and the bat turned into a pile of fragments, which were swallowed by Li Onping. On the other side, Kron's body had been regenerated. His hands were gripping the ground tightly, and his eyes were filled with terror as he looked at Li Onping. He could not believe that Fang Xingjian had eaten the blood demon alive just like that. At this moment, Li Onping had become a demon among demons in his eyes. Seeing Li Onping look over, Kron felt a chill in his heart. He even forgot that he had died once. He shouted, "Don't eat me. I surrender." Li Onping did not plan to eat Kron. After all, he had only wanted to try and see if he could eliminate these fellows with undying bodies. However, it seemed that the Netherworld Kingdom's undying body was almost absolute. Although Fang Xingjian had eaten the blood demon, it was still causing trouble in Fang Xingjian's stomach. It was constantly between being dissolved and not dissolved by Fang Xingjian's gastric juices. Even if it was dissolved, it would immediately regrow. Therefore, Li Onping did not plan to eat another blood demon. Just then, Fang Xingjian raised his eyebrows. Samuel, who had been under his feet earlier, had finished regenerating. Leaving behind a series of afterimages, Samuel quickly flashed away. Damn it, what kind of monster is Li Onping? They're doomed. Be it the League of Stars or the Virtual Number Service, they're all doomed this time. This monster isn't something that humans can eliminate. Samuel had not really experienced how terrifying Li Onping was when he was in New Dongyang. Although he had read the information and knew that Li Onping was very strong, it was not as terrifying as experiencing it for himself. Right now, the only thought in his mind was to escape. He did not even have the intention to look back. His body flashed again, and his eyes were suddenly covered by a shadow. It turned out that Li Onping had directly rushed in front of him at an indescribable speed and placed an index finger on his forehead. At this moment, Samuel had not even reacted. He was still in a daze after teleporting. His eyes had not yet been able to send the image to his brain. With a bang, Li Onping's index finger flicked directly onto his brain. His brain exploded like a watermelon once again. Not to mention his abilities, he could not even make any movements. Then Li Onping grabbed his shoulder with one hand, and the virtual field instantly squeezed Samuel into a ball of flesh. Weighing the ball of flesh in his hand, Li Onping looked toward the sky. What is he trying to do? Kron gulped. Just as Samuel and Li Onping were fleeing, he had thought of escaping as well. However, before he could even think about it, Li Onping had already crushed Samuel's head with one finger and squeezed him into a ball of flesh. Seeing Li Onping's actions, a bad premonition surged in his heart. His premonition was right. Li Onping grabbed the ball of flesh that Samuel had been squeezed into, took a step back, and did a motion of accumulating power. Then, he took a step forward and threw the ball of flesh into the sky, as if he was throwing a baseball. Li Onping's hand exploded with air currents. The meatball had already shot up into the sky, leaving behind a trail of blood. It looked like an electromagnetic cannon, blasting a hole in the clouds in the sky as it shot out into outer space with an unstoppable momentum. If it were an ordinary ball of flesh, it would probably turn into ashes before it could fly far. However, Samuel had an immortal body. Therefore, he was pushed by Li Onping's tremendous force, piercing through the entire atmosphere and flying toward outer space. Then, Li Onping appeared with a flash and grabbed Kron, who was trembling in fear. What happened next looked like an adult grabbing a primary school student, squeezing him into a ball, and then throwing him into outer space. Chapter 322. Inside the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace, the entrance was already guarded by armed soldiers. The guests in the hall were restless. Zhuomai stood at the entrance and listened to the report from his subordinates. The more he listened, the uglier his expression became. The ambassador from the Confederation ignored the soldiers and walked up to Zhuomai. He pointed at Zhuomai and asked, "What's the situation outside?" Why are all our communication devices cut off? How exactly did Great Xia's defense work? Zwamai frowned and looked at the confused, anxious, and nervous people around him. He could only avoid the topic and say, "It's okay, everyone. The parade just ran into some traffic problems. Please return to your seats. His Majesty will be here soon." Hearing his explanation, everyone was unhappy. Tyrole's ambassador also stood up and shouted, "Do you think we're 3 years old? How many times have you said the same thing? We have a right to know what's going on outside. Otherwise, this will become a serious diplomatic dispute. Officer Zwa, do you know how many countries are here?" After he said that, more people started to make a fuss, especially those small countries in the Western continent. They all followed behind Tyrol and the Confederation and started to criticize the Xia for not doing their job well. On the other hand, the people from the Eastern continent were all silent, as if this had nothing to do with them. A few people like Princess Baiwe, Fong Yuelin, and Ice Fortress's Claudia even looked at the Western continent's representatives with mockery. All right, at this time, Fong Yuhuang lightly coughed. The inhuman aura of a fifth ability, super being, was released for a moment. Everyone in the hall quieted down. Even the representatives from the Confederation and Tyrol, who were the most rowdy, looked at Fong Yuhuang and didn't say anything else. A fifth ability, super being, was indeed a powerful force that could change the situation of a country. The people in the hall were all representatives of the Xia. They weren't normal citizens of the Western continent. They didn't know about the existence of ability super beings. They knew the power and privileges of a fifth ability super being, and they also knew Fong Yuhuang's identity. Even if Fong Yuhuang were to beat them up right now, they wouldn't be able to get back at him for the rest of their lives. Therefore, even if they were cursing barbaric yellow-skinned monkeys and inferior race in their hearts, at least on the surface, they would not show any disrespect to the Jade Emperor. Seeing that most of the guests had returned to their seats, Zhuo heaved a sigh of relief. He nodded at Fong Yuhuang and began to direct the work again. Fong Yuhuang also nodded kindly at the left branch. If it was a year ago, before the Battle of Danyang, Fong Yuhuang might have thought of defeating Li Onping and becoming the strongest in the world. However, after the Battle of Danyang and the series of events that followed, as well as Li Onping's terrifying strength again and again, he had no choice but to accept it. This extinguished the ambition in Fong Yuhuang's heart bit by bit. The strongest. Power. This was what Fong Yuhuang had been pursuing his entire life. Even if it was the throne, power, and wealth, he could give up these things for greater power. However, Li Onping, a man who was like a mountain in front of him, made him lose the motivation to chase after him. However, because of his ambition in the beginning, he missed the opportunity to join the Xia Dragonfinch. Now that he saw by Xinghe, Emma, Doctor, and Xia Laikong, who were all level 5 experts, as well as the Xia Dragonfinch, who was getting stronger and stronger, he really wanted to join this core class. However, he never found the opportunity. Previously, when he worked together with Yin Bei to eliminate the crusade, Li Onping only praised him a little. Therefore, after coming to Tianjing this time, Fong Yuhuang had been looking for opportunities to befriend Li Onping and the Xia Dragonfinch. It was obvious that he had done that on purpose. However, not long after everyone sat down, gunshots and explosions were heard outside the auditorium. Fong Yuhuang also frowned. Because he was in Tianjing and inside the palace, he didn't release his psychic energy to scan the surroundings. Therefore, he didn't know what was going on outside. However, there were continuous gunshots in the palace. Obviously, the situation outside was very bad. At this moment, the door of the auditorium was kicked open. A man whose face was as pale as a zombie and whose eyes were completely white walked in slowly. Although the man's appearance had changed a lot, Fong Yuhuang was still able to recognize him at first glance. "Qilin," he muttered to himself in disbelief. On the other side, the Dragon Sparrow guards and soldiers all pointed their guns at King Qilin. Zomai looked outside the door and saw a large number of corpses. Obviously, they were all done by this man. He shouted, "Who are you? Trespassing in the palace? If you don't want to die, surrender immediately." King Qilin chuckled softly. Layers of silver-white scales grew out from the surface of his body, and the muscles on his body swelled as if they had eaten hormones. Soon, he became a huge beast wrapped in silver-white scales. When he was just resurrected by the Netherworld Kingdom, he was still a little unruly and unwilling to listen to Paladin's orders. However, after Paladin showed that he could completely control him, he had no choice but to obey. Moreover, he was killed by Li Anping himself. Coming to Tianjing to take revenge was obviously to his liking. Ha 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 ha! King Qilin roared. Li Anping is dead. Now, all of you will be buried with him. Suddenly, there was a small commotion in the auditorium when they heard King Qilin's words. So I didn't say a word. He pointed his finger and fired a high-temperature laser at King Qirin. However, after the laser hit the scales, it only melted a few pieces of the scales. It didn't have any other effect. The other guards also fired at the same time. However, when the bullets hit King Qilin's scales, there was no other effect except for sparks. King Qilin, on the other hand, roared angrily. Streaks of lightning shot out from his body. He rushed into the dragon sparrow guards like a tiger in a flock of sheep. He weaved through the crowd, and with a casual swipe of his claws, he could snap a dragon sparrow guard in half. Sometimes, he would even grab a person and bite off their head. Mai was the strongest person among the dragon sparrow guards present. However, even he couldn't do anything to King Qilin, who had an immortal body. In just a minute, more than half of the dragon sparrow guards present had become tattered corpses. All the guests in the auditorium screamed and fled to the corner of the auditorium. Fang Yuelin stood up and shouted, "Father, you're still alive?" King Qilin's body trembled when he heard that. He looked at Fang Yuelin and revealed a terrifying smile on his beast-like face. "Yuelin, you're here too." He threw away a corpse in his hand and walked slowly toward Fang Yuelin. "Father, this is great. You're not dead." King Qilin's huge, beastly mouth broke into a smile. A strong smell of blood came out from his mouth. He said as he walked, "No, I'm already dead. However, I crawled out from hell again. I'm here to take revenge on Li Anping." At the next moment, he dashed toward Fang Yuelin, leaving behind a series of afterimages. His huge, beastly claw swung toward Fang Yuelin's head and sent him flying. Fang Yuelin got up while trembling. His entire face was swollen. He looked at King Qilin in disbelief. "Father, you be *TCH. King Qilin said furiously, "Li Anping killed me. How dare you and your mother acknowledge him as your father and submit to him? You watched as Yong, and the others died in Li Anping's hands. You're not fit to be my daughter." King Qilin's gaze swept across the crowd and suddenly stopped to Claudia. "The Saint Princess of the Ice Fortress?" King Qilin's eyes revealed a hint of lust. His scarlet tongue stuck out from his mouth. "I heard that you become Li Anping's woman? Hee, if I were to *CK you now, do you think he would be so angry that he would jump out from his grave?" After saying that, he walked toward Claudia. It was obvious that he was planning to use his current transformed state to take Claudia on the spot. Seeing the monster-like King Qilin walking over, the crowd immediately screamed and scattered. Claudia retreated to the side in a panic. However, she realized that King Qilin had already appeared in front of her in a flash. He wanted to grab Claudia. King Qilin tapped his 10 fingers on the left. Various types of heat, cold, and decomposition rays hit King Qilin. However, he was unable to stop him. King Qilin said furiously, "Jade Emperor Fong, are you rebelling? Enough." With a soft shout, King Qilin realized that his hand was unable to touch Claudia, who was so close to him. He slowly turned his head and looked in the direction of the soft shout. He muttered, "Are you going to stop me?" Jade Emperor Fong looked at King Qilin with an uncertain expression. "Qilin, are you really not dead?" King Qilin laughed out loud. His words were filled with resentment. "Dead? I've already died in the hands of Li Anping. I was resurrected by Paladin's Netherworld Kingdom. You didn't take revenge for me in Qilin City. Instead, you became Li Anping's fighter. Are you going to stop me from taking revenge now?" "My good father, Jade Emperor Fong sighed and asked, Paladin, the leader of the Knights Templar? The Codex Nation is also here. King Qilin sneered. That's right. Not only the Codex Nation, but also the Queen of Heaven's League of Stars and the Federation's imaginary agency. The entire Tianjing is already in our hands. As soon as King Qilin said that, everyone present was in an uproar. The Knights Templar, the imaginary agency, and the League of Stars. All of them were important characters in the Western continent. They would affect the changes of the entire world. At this moment, they were all gathered in Tianjing, Xia, to besiege Lianping. Jade Emperor Fong looked hesitant. He suddenly asked, You just said that Lianping is dead? Are you sure? When Jade Emperor Fong asked this question, Left Vein's expression changed. His heart sank slowly. Chapter 323. Hearing Fong Yuhuang's words, King Qilin sneered and said, Even if he is fine now, I'm afraid it will be soon. Other than the Queen of Heaven, who has reached the 6th level, there are more than 20 level 5 elites who are attacking Tianjing. Do you think Lianping still has a chance to survive? Once King Qilin's words came out, it shocked everyone at the scene. One level 6 aptitude user and more than 20 level 5 aptitude users. Normally, a level 5 aptitude user was a rare sight. They were definitely important figures who had the power to overturn a country. Not to mention that there were more than 20 level 5 aptitude users. This was a force that could change the course of human history. Even Lianping might not be a match for this force. Most of the people at the scene thought so. Even Zuiyu and the Dragon Sparrow Guards couldn't help but worry. Moreover, Lianping still hadn't shown up. Tianjing's defense formation also didn't respond. This made some people even more certain of King Qilin's words. Is King Qilin telling the truth? If there are really so many people attacking His Majesty, it's why you started to get nervous. Fong Yuhuang was silent after hearing this. He still didn't open the 33 paradises and trapped King Qilin in the same place. Seeing his father still hesitating, King Qilin said angrily, Father, why are you still hesitating? Whether it is Lianping or Xia, they're all dead. Do you still want to stop them? Do you think you can stop the revenge of so many level 5 aptitude users? You can die if you want, but don't take the whole Baiwa Empire with you. Fong Yuhuang frowned and said, Lianping won't be defeated so easily. Compared to King Qilin, who was killed by Lianping instantly, Fong Yuhuang knew more about Lianping's power. What he was most worried about was that with so many aptitude users here, they might not be able to kill Lianping and let him escape. Then, everyone would suffer from Lianping's crazy revenge. Especially someone like him who had betrayed them. He would be Lianping's #1 target for revenge. After thinking about it, Fong Yuhuang did not dare to remove the 33 paradises in the end. King Qilin glared at Fong Yuhuang and understood his opponent's plan. His good imperial father was probably trying to play both sides. He wanted to be in a stalemate with him here, and when there was definite news, he would help the other side. Unfortunately, his power was restrained by the 33 paradises. Now that the Jade Emperor had changed the space around King Qilin, there was nothing he could do. At this moment, a black stream of qi swept across everyone in the auditorium. Ordinary people didn't notice anything unusual, but Fong Yuhuang, King Qilin, and Left Vein's expression changed. Some were happy, some were angry, and some were afraid. Because that stream of qi brought about a violent and murderous intent, it was too obvious. It was Lianping's qi. In fact, Lianping's hearing was enough to cover the entire Tianjing. Almost every corner of Tianjing was under his surveillance. All the developments in the auditorium were under his control. The reason why he didn't go over was because the situation in some places was more critical. For example, the entire palace. Lianping was in the sky above the palace. Behind him, the black stream of qi flashed, and the qi incarnation appeared with the Sword of Legacy. After delivering the Sword of Legacy, the qi incarnation flew in the direction of Xia Longke base. In midair, Li Onping held the sword with one hand. The black stream of qi surged out and covered the entire palace. Li Onping closed his eyes. Screams, roars, explosions, running sounds, the sound of swords slicing through skin, and the sound of bullets piercing through the air. At this moment, all of them entered his mind and intertwined with the blueprint of the entire palace. Together with the scanning of qi, it formed a perfect moving map. The ones who attacked the palace were Li Onping's clones from the Violet clan. Each of them was as strong as Li Onping, who had fought with the Warrior of Destruction Tom in Jadeite City. They even surpassed him in terms of strength. Each of these clones was equivalent to a powerful level 4 ability user. Even level 5 ability users would have trouble dealing with them. Therefore, when they invaded the palace, the Imperial Guards were defeated without any resistance. Even a leader, Scorpion, was seriously injured and unconscious. He was sent to the depths of the palace. In just 10 minutes, less than a tenth of the Imperial Guards were left. On the other hand, there were almost no casualties among the clones. The blood of the Imperial Guards dyed the entire palace red. There are 2,000 enemies in total. There are still 3,000 Imperial Guards left. They are escaping with the women and officials toward the auditorium. The voices were constantly transmitted to Li Onping's ears. Together with the qi that covered the entire palace, the voices and location of each enemy were transmitted to his mind. At this moment, Li Onping knew the location of everyone in the palace. The legacy in his hand stirred in the air. His hand and the sword created a series of afterimages, cutting through the air at a frequency of thousands of times per second, creating shockwaves in the air. Not only was the legacy made of adamantium, its sturdiness was unparalleled in the world. It had also received Emma's spatial cut, so it was countless times sharper than before. A white light flashed from the legacy. Countless sword lights and sword mist slashed toward the palace as Li Onping swung the sword. There were 2,000 sword auras in total. They flew past at supersonic speed, like a brilliant meteor shower, covering the entire palace. Everywhere they passed, no matter if it was the walls, the roof, or the combat uniforms, everything was cut in half. No clone could dodge or block any of the sword auras. The 2,000 clones corresponded to the 2,000 sword auras. They were either slashed in half at the waist, beheaded, or smashed into pieces. In almost the same second, all of them turned into minced corpses. At the sight of this, the entire Imperial Guards broke out into thunderous cheers. They looked at Li Onping in midair and cheered. After killing all the invaders in the palace, Li Onping raised his head. His gaze seemed to pierce through layers of space and look toward a certain existence in the sky. 10,000 meters above the palace, the ark that looked like a black coffin was floating slowly. The person in charge of the operation, Violet, had a head of white hair. He looked at the palace on the screen and revealed an excited smile. The League of Stars had spent money to hire them for this operation. They had also provided them with the ark. Very good. The actual battle this time was very successful. The elderly man looked at the rows of data and said slowly, "If we can get the mother's corpse this time, the clone warrior's stats will definitely increase again." Saying this, he turned to ask his assistant, "How are the casualties at the moment?" The assistant tapped on his damaged tablet and reported, "There aren't any casualties at the moment. I believe that it's only a matter of time before we take over the entire palace." Just then, a staff member suddenly exclaimed, "Li Onping is here." As the screen continued to zoom in, Li Onping's appearance in the sky above the palace appeared before everyone's eyes. The white-haired elderly man revealed a fanatical expression as he looked at Li Onping, who was in midair. His gaze was as if he was looking at an unparalleled beauty. However, before he could give any orders, Li Onping swung his sword with his right hand. White sword auras scattered out toward the entire palace. The white-haired elderly man looked at the screen in disbelief. The data representing the clones was decreasing rapidly. In less than 1 second, all the clones were killed. Faced with the real Li Onping, they were like toys, unable to put up any resistance. One of the staff members exclaimed, "This is bad. He seems to have discovered us." What? Before the white-haired elderly man could react, Li Onping's figure on the screen flashed and disappeared. Where'd he go? Can't find him. His speed is too fast. He's advancing toward us. One of the staff members screamed, "He's coming over. His speed is over Mach 10. He's already here." "Where?" the elderly man asked anxiously. However, no one answered. He roared out in fear, "Who can tell me where he is?" The assistant tapped on the tablet in his hand with a pale face. Li Onping's appearance appeared on the screen once again. He said in a trembling voice, "He's right above us." The elderly man stared at Li Onping on the screen. What is he trying to do? No one answered the elderly man's question. All the staff members stopped what they were doing and looked at Li Onping on the screen. At this moment, their lives were all in the hands of this man. As for Li Onping, the legacy sword in his hand vibrated again. It streaked across the air with a series of afterimages. This time, one horizontal and one vertical, two sword energy waves that were more than 1 kilometer long slashed directly at the black arc. Rumble. The entire arc shook violently. The white-haired elderly man grabbed the seat tightly and looked at Li Onping on the screen with a face full of despair. He never expected Li Onping to discover them from so far away. He also never expected that the clones in the arc would be so vulnerable in front of him. Where's the Heavenly Queen? Where's the Titan? Where do they go? Why did Li Onping come back to attack us? Beside him, the staff members and assistants were panicking and trying to escape. Some of them were full of despair and looked like they had lost all hope. Li Onping's two sword energy waves slashed the arc along the cross line and split it into 4 parts. The staff members looked at the arc that had been split into 4 parts and kept exploding and collapsing. They could not understand how Li Onping had done it. In the next moment, the entire arc had already collapsed into countless parts, falling towards the sky. However, before it could fall much further, it was covered by even more densely packed waves of sword chi, turning into countless pieces that drifted towards the ground. Chapter 3:24. While Li Onping was cleaning up the invaders inside and outside Tianjing City one after another. At the center of the defense formation, the doctor's hands were quickly tapping on the keyboard. At this moment, a teleportation gate suddenly appeared behind him, and Emma came out with a haggard expression. Her hair was stuck together by sweat, and there were even 2 or 3 streaks of blood on her cheeks. "How is it? The Queen of Heaven is attacking the base with Zhu Rong and Songbang. I sent Xia Laikong and Xia Yinyun over to support them, but I'm afraid they won't be able to hold on for long." A hint of nervousness appeared in Emma's eyes. 6th rank, much more powerful than I thought. If it wasn't for His Majesty, the Queen of Heaven alone would be enough to wipe us out. "Xia Yinyun? Why did you send her over? Do you want to be eaten by Li Onping?" Emma waved her hand. "She subdued a monster in New Danyang City. She can help." "Forget it. Li Onping has already escaped anyway. I'm adjusting the defense formation. I'm afraid it'll take a while." While saying this, the doctor's hands didn't stop moving, and the screen quickly jumped. The other side is very cunning. The gravity coefficient is constantly changing. This will take me a lot of time. I need to change the defense formation from static to dynamic. Then how much longer do you need? The doctor didn't even turn his head. "Give me 2 more minutes." 2 minutes? Emma said hatefully. "Then I'll go help over there first." "No." The doctor stopped Emma and said indifferently, "The other side has already found this place. There are about 3 5th rank ability users. Help me block them. Just 2 minutes." 3 5th rank ability users? Emma heard the doctor's words and directly cursed. 3, and he still wanted her to block them for 2 minutes. This wasn't 2 minutes of escaping, but 2 minutes of blocking them. The doctor didn't care about Emma's tone and said calmly, "I remember you left coordinates in New Danyang City, right? Just let those monsters come over." "What?" Emma hesitated. "Those monsters are wild and untamed. If we just let them go, there's no time to hesitate. If you don't rely on those monsters, You won't be able to last more than 2 minutes. The doctor slowly said, those monsters have been trained for so long, and Li Anping is in Tianjing City. Nothing will happen. Go to the ground and face the enemy. Fighting here will affect me. Emma nodded helplessly. She turned around and disappeared. When she reappeared, she was already above the center of the formation. This was the place where the parade was supposed to pass, but because of the chaos in the city, the crowd watching the parade had all left. The railings, flags, and other decorations on the side of the street had all fallen to the ground. Emma glanced at it and didn't care about it anymore. She pressed her hands into the air, and instantly, a black crack more than 10 meters long appeared in the air. Like a crack in a door, it slowly opened in Emma's hands. This time, Emma's opening of the portal was much slower than usual. This was because the portal from New Danyang City to Tianjing was opened directly. It was a distance of several thousand kilometers. If Emma hadn't set the coordinates in New Danyang City in advance, it would be impossible to open such a portal. With such a long distance, the speed at which the teleportation gate was generated was also very slow. Damn it, 3 level 5 ability users, please don't come over at this time. Emma continued to inject psychic energy into the portal and watched the black crack expand centimeter by centimeter. She prayed in her heart that the other party wouldn't come too quickly. However, as the saying goes, good things don't come true, but bad things do. When the 10-meter-tall portal in front of Emma opened more than 10 centimeters, the figures of 3 men slowly appeared in front of her. Demir Tanner looked at Emma and teased. The thing in this woman's hands is the center of the defense formation. It's really obvious. Beside him were Titan and Solomon. The two of them stood very close to each other and were about 2 to 3 meters away from Tanner. It seemed that they were very worried about this first level 5 ability user in history. Hearing Tanner's words, Titan frowned. As a veteran level 5 ability user in the League of Stars, he had the power to control gravity. He had even led a team to attack the Xia Dragonfinch in the past. This time, he was fully in charge of the plan to break through Tianjing's defense formation. It's not her. She's Emma, the Xia Dragonfinch's level 5 ability user. Her ability is to open a portal. The center of the defense formation should be underground, where she's at right now. Titan said calmly, I'm afraid he's trying to stop us. The other party is adjusting the defense formation. Once they succeed, the situation will be disadvantageous to us. Solomon immediately stood up. Don't waste time. Li Anping has already escaped. Let's make the best use of our time. After saying this, he lightly blew out a breath of air. A wave of white mist already surged towards Emma's location. That was the ultimate cold air that was countless times colder than liquid nitrogen. Wherever it passed, all molecular movements would come to a complete standstill. The surrounding temperature rapidly dropped. Before the white, icy mist even approached Emma, a thick layer of frost had already formed beneath her feet. Such terrifying cold air was just a casual breath of air from Solomon. Emma's mind immediately became highly focused. She understood that the following period of time would be a battle of life and death for her. With a thought from Emma, a black portal directly appeared in front of the cold air. The cold air that surged over directly entered the portal. At the same time, a black portal also opened above Titan and the other 2 people's heads. The surging cold air directly entered through this portal. Facing the reversed psychic energy, the 3 people present did not move at all. Only Solomon raised his right hand. The originally ferocious cold air immediately turned into a tamed puppy. It gathered into a ball and shrunk into Solomon's hand. Tanner on the side smiled sinisterly. You can't do it. Let me play with her. After he finished speaking, he flicked his fingers. A series of complicated changes immediately appeared in the surrounding magnetic field. Emma did not know that Tanner directly caused a microwave heating effect. For her, it meant that the temperature at her location rapidly increased in an instant. She screamed in shock. A black spatial fragment had already slashed towards Titan and the other 2 people across the air. This kind of attack was purely caused by the unstable spatial structure. Even adamantium would not be able to withstand his slash. Therefore, even if the combined strength of the three of them was much stronger than Emma, they still had to dodge in the face of this attack. Titan waved his hand, and an invisible gravitational force had already grabbed him and Solomon and flew backwards. As for Tanner, he also used a magnetic field to control his body to fly backwards. Seeing that his 3/5 energy rank powerhouses were still forced back by Emma, Titan's eyes flashed with anger. In fact, before Shang Jinhai appeared, Titan had always considered himself as the future leader of the League of Stars. He believed that apart from the Queen of Heaven, he was the strongest ability user in the entire world. However, he never expected that after Shang Jinhai appeared, the Queen of Heaven actually placed all of her attention on Shang Jinhai. Meanwhile, Shang Jinhai also displayed unprecedented talent, replacing Titan's position and becoming the popular candidate for the next leader of the League of Stars. How could Titan swallow this anger? Then, there was Li Anping, this anomaly, who appeared out of nowhere, suppressing the four poles with unimaginable strength. This even made Titan secretly hate and envy him. This kind of continuous psychological disparity always made his heart suffer. He couldn't wait for Li Anping and Shang Jinhai, these newly emerged 5th rank ability users, to all die out. Now, even Li Anping's subordinate, a woman who was previously unknown, was putting on an appearance as if she was going to fight to the death. Titan's eyes flashed with anger, and the soles of his feet lightly stepped on the ground. Immediately, an invisible force directly surged out from the ground, grabbing towards Emma, who was in front of him. That was the invisible gravitational force from the entire planet, which was instantly magnified 10 times by Titan's ability. Kneel down. Following Titan's explosive shout, the 10 times gravity directly acted on Emma's body. She wasn't an ability user with a strong physique to begin with, so this directly caused damage to her body, especially her internal organs, which suffered huge pressure. She cried out, spitting out a large mouthful of blood towards the ground, and her entire body couldn't help but kneel down on one knee. Countless fragments and cracks also appeared on the ground from the pressure. Seeing that Emma still wanted to force herself to stand up, Titan's eyes flashed with a trace of tyranny. "Did I say to let you stand up?" Following Titan's words, a gravitational force with Emma's arm as the center began to pull. A series of kacha-kacha sounds came from her right arm, as if it was going to be broken in the next moment. Ah! At the same time that Emma cried out miserably, she waved one hand, and another spatial fragment slashed towards Titan. However, although this kind of attack's power was great, to destroy the stable structure of space to achieve the attack's effect, its speed was really too slow. Titan took a light step and already dodged this attack. Just as he raised his right hand and was about to deal a fatal blow to Emma, the 10-meter-tall spatial door that Emma had opened suddenly expanded, completely blocking Emma's body. Titan frowned and directly increased the gravitational force output, but there was no reaction at all. If he could go around the spatial gate, he would be able to see the place where Emma had knelt down, leaving behind a black spatial gate on the ground. She had already entered it and transported herself away. Solomon got close to Titan, and his eyes stared at the spatial gate that had suddenly expanded. He said, "There's something wrong with this gate." Tanner nodded as well. A 10-meter-tall spatial gate. What on earth is she trying to send over first? Who cares what it is? It'll die the moment it comes out. Titan let out a cold snort, and with a raise of his hand, he once again changed the upward gravitational force. At the place where Emma had been standing earlier, countless amounts of cement and soil flew up, and a huge pit was formed in the blink of an eye. It was still getting deeper and deeper, extending toward where the doctor was. "That woman has already escaped. Tanner, come and help. Quickly destroy the defensive formation. Solomon, you'll be on guard." Titan called out a few times, but did not hear any reply. He turned his head and saw Tanner staring at the pitch-black spatial gate. "Something's not right," Tanner said. Titan said, What's wrong? Quickly come and help. It's very important whether the defensive formation is broken or not. I don't wish for Li Anping to be able to leave as he wishes when the fight breaks out. Just as the two of them were speaking, a roar that sounded like a lion's or a tiger's suddenly rang out from the spatial gate. Solomon's countenance changed, and he looked at Titan and said, "Did you hear that?" Tanner smiled. It sounded like the roar of some animal. Titan opened his mouth, wanting to say something. Suddenly, a huge dragon claw that was over 3 meters thick and covered in countless golden scales reached out from the spatial gate, grabbing fiercely toward Titan with a strong stench. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.